The lone wolf died with its yellow eyes fixed on Thomas McGrady, a silent accusation in that final gaze. Blood from its throat darkened the Texas dirt, spreading outward like spilled coffee on his mother's tablecloth. The comparison came unbidden, and with it, her voice soft but firm, the way it had been in those final days. Thomas, some men are born with the killing inside them. The trick is knowing what deserves killing and what don't. Tom wiped his blade clean on his trousers, the worn Bowie knife that had seen him through the war, and 15 hard years since. The sandstorm had come on sudden, typical for April in the Texas panhandle of 1885, but it had driven the desperate wolf straight into his cattle pen. The beast had already dragged down a yearling heifer before Tom could intervene. "Sorry, old boy," he muttered, not entirely sure if he was addressing the dead predator or the slaughtered calf. "Drought makes desperate creatures of us all." The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying stinging particles that bit into any exposed skin. Tom squinted against the assault, his weathered face creased by 40 years of sun wind and a particular kind of solitude that can only come from choosing to live where most men couldn't survive. His eyes, the same pale blue that had earned him the name Widowmaker during the late unpleasantness, scanned the horizon out of long habit. That's when he saw it, a shape moving through the swirling dust a quarter-mile east near his property line. Not the loping gait of another wolf, but something larger, a horse moving erratically. Tom whistled sharply, bringing his own mount trotting from the shelter of the barn. The big buckskin named General, a private joke Tom had never bothered explaining to anyone, approached with the quiet confidence of an animal that trusted its master implicitly. "Come on, old soldier," Tom said, swinging into the saddle. "Someone's having a worse day than us." The sandstorm obscured much beyond 50 yards, but Tom knew every inch of Broken Creek Ranch the way some men knew their wives' bodies. He navigated by instinct more than sight, following the contours of land he'd walked since boyhood. The horse and rider materialized through the haze, a bay mare, stumbling badly, its rider slumped forward and barely hanging on. As Tom approached, the mare finally collapsed, sending its rider tumbling into the dirt. The figure lay motionless. "Damn it all," Tom muttered, dismounting swiftly despite the protest of his right knee, a souvenir from Gettysburg that ached whenever the weather changed. He approached cautiously, one hand resting on the worn walnut grip of the Colt Army revolver at his hip. The fallen rider was a woman. Tom hadn't expected that. Out here 70 miles from anything resembling civilization, women were as rare as rain had become. She lay face down, dark hair spilling from beneath a battered hat dust already collecting in the folds of what had once been fine traveling clothes. Blood matted the hair at her temple. Tom knelt beside her, fingers seeking a pulse at her throat. It fluttered against his fingertips, weak but present. The mare wasn't so lucky, foaming at the mouth, eyes rolling white with pain and fear. A broken leg, Tom diagnosed with a glance. The animal was finished. He removed his bandana, pressed it gently to the woman's head wound. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Tom sighed, looking back toward his cabin, barely visible through the swirling dust. 3 miles, maybe 4. Night coming on and the storm showing no signs of abating. This wasn't how he'd planned to end his day. Wasn't how he'd planned to end any day in the 5 years since his mother's passing had left him truly alone on the ranch. Tom McGrady didn't invite complications, and unconscious women qualified as complications of the highest order. Still, there wasn't really a choice to make, not one his mother would have allowed at any rate. Tom holstered his revolver, retrieved his rifle from its scabbard, and with a murmured apology to the suffering mare, put a single bullet through its brain. The sound was swallowed by the howling wind. Then, with a grunt of effort, he lifted the unconscious woman and draped her carefully over General's saddle before mounting behind her. One arm wrapped securely around her waist, he turned the buckskin toward home. "Never were much for conversation anyway," he told the unconscious woman as they rode. "Guess we'll get along fine." Bam! The cabin at Broken Creek Ranch wasn't large, but it was solid, built by Tom's father before the fever took him, expanded by Tom and his mother in the years that followed. The 2 rooms were spare but clean, the furnishings sturdy and functional. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by a kitchen area with an iron stove and a rough-hewn table with 3 chairs, though Tom had eaten alone for years now. He laid the woman on his bed, the only proper one in the house, and lit the lamp on the bedside table. In its warm glow, he got his first good look at his unexpected guest. She was perhaps 30, with features that spoke of good breeding and city living. Her traveling dress, though trail-worn and torn at the hem, was of quality material. A thin gold band circled the third finger of her left hand. Married then, or at least a widow. Her face was pale beneath the dirt and dried blood-high cheekbones and a determined chin, giving her an aristocratic appearance even in unconsciousness. Tom found himself staring longer than was proper and turned away abruptly. 5 years without speaking to a woman who wasn't selling goods in town had left him awkward at best. He set to practical matters, stoking the fire heating water, finding clean cloths. The head wound looked worse than it was, as such injuries often did. Tom cleaned it carefully, the gentleness of his large calloused hands at odds with their weathered appearance. He'd tended enough wounds during the war to know this one wouldn't kill her provided infection didn't set in. When he'd done what he could for her injury, Tom hesitated. Her clothes were filthy from the fall and the storm. His mother would have changed her into something clean without a second thought, but Tom wasn't his mother. The impropriety of it sent heat rushing to his face despite being alone in his own home. In the end, compromise seemed best. He removed her boots and outer jacket, but left her dress in place, covering her with a clean quilt his mother had made. Then he retreated to the main room, built up the fire against the growing chill, and settled into his chair with his father's old Henry rifle across his lap. In the saddlebags he'd recovered from the woman's dead horse, he found little of use: some provisions, a small Derringer pistol, and several folded documents. Tom wasn't one to pry, but he needed to know who he'd brought into his home. The first paper he unfolded was a letter of introduction penned in flowing script on expensive stationery. The bearer of this letter, Mrs. Victoria Thornton, travels with my highest recommendation. Any courtesy extended to her will be recognized as a personal debt of honor to myself. Judge Hiram Sterling, Boston, Massachusetts. Tom frowned. Boston was a mighty long way from the Texas Panhandle. The second document was a deed of some sort, but before he could examine it further, a soft moan from the bedroom caught his attention. He quickly refolded the papers and returned them to the saddlebag. In the bedroom, the woman Victoria Thornton, if the letter was to be believed, was stirring. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing eyes the deep green of summer sage. For a moment, they were unfocused, then sharpened with sudden fear. She tried to sit up, gasping at the pain the movement caused. "Easy now," Tom said, keeping his distance. His voice came out rougher than intended from lack of use. "You're safe." Victoria Thornton stared at him, taking in his tall frame, the worn clothes, the 3-day beard, and most pointedly the rifle still held loosely in one hand. Her gaze darted around the room, cataloging exits and potential weapons with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned the value of caution. "Where am I?" Her voice carried the cultured tones of Eastern money, but beneath it lay something raw: fear maybe, or desperation. "Broken Creek Ranch, Texas." Tom set the rifle aside, trying to appear less threatening. "Found you unconscious after your horse went down. The animal didn't make it." Her hand went to the bandage on her forehead, then moved to take inventory of her person, relief flickering across her features when she found herself still clothed. The implication stung Tom more than it should have. "You've been taking care of me." It wasn't a question, but there was something like surprise in her voice. "Did what needed doing, nothing more." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "You've been out about 3 hours, storm's still blowing. You're welcome to shelter here till it passes." Victoria studied him with that same measuring gaze. "You have a name, sir." "Thomas McGrady. Most folks just call me Tom." "And you live here, alone?" The question seemed to fill the small room. Tom nodded once, acutely aware of how it must appear, a solitary man in a remote cabin with an injured woman. No witnesses, no neighbors for miles. "My mother passed 5 years back. It's just been me since." Something in his tone must have reassured her, because Victoria relaxed slightly against the pillows. "Then I'm doubly in your debt, Mr. McGrady. Not many men would offer shelter to a stranger in these parts, let alone tend to her injuries." Tom shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. Her smile was small but genuine. "We both know that isn't true." She tried to sit up again, more carefully this time, and succeeded. "I won't impose on your hospitality longer than necessary. Once this storm passes—" "You've got a concussion," Tom interrupted. "Won't be riding anywhere for at least a day or two, even if you had a horse, which you don't." Victoria's shoulders slumped slightly. "I see." An awkward silence descended. Tom had never been skilled at conversation, even in the best circumstances. 5 years of talking mainly to his livestock hadn't improved matters. "You're a long way from Boston, Mrs. Thornton," he said finally. Her eyes widened slightly. "How did you—" "Found a letter in your saddlebag. Wasn't trying to pry, just needed to know who I was bringing into my home." "Of course." She looked away. "It's a reasonable precaution." Didn't read more than the introduction, Tom added. Your business is your own. Victoria's gaze returned to his face, studying him with renewed intensity. You're not what I expected, Mr. McGrady. Meaning, most men would have taken the opportunity to go through all my possessions, or worse. Tom felt heat rising up his neck. I'm not most men, Mrs. Thornton. No, she said softly. I don't believe you are. Another silence, less awkward this time. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. In the main room, a log settled in the fireplace with a soft crack. Are you hungry? Tom asked suddenly. Got stew on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep your strength up. Victoria nodded, a grateful smile touching her lips. I'd appreciate that, thank you. Tom retreated to the kitchen, relieved to have something practical to do. He ladled stew into a bowl, cut a chunk of bread from the loaf he'd baked 2 days prior, and placed both on a tray with a cup of coffee. When he returned to the bedroom, Victoria had managed to prop herself up further, though the effort had clearly cost her. Don't get many visitors out here, Tom said, setting the tray across her lap. Hope it's passable. Victoria took a spoonful of the stew, then another with evident appreciation. It's more than passable, Mr. McGrady. Did you cook this yourself? Tom nodded. Man living alone either learns to cook or eats poorly. A surprisingly progressive attitude. There was genuine approval in her voice. Most men I know consider cooking beneath them. Most men you know probably don't have to do for themselves. Tom hesitated in the doorway. I'll let you eat in peace. Actually, Victoria said quickly, I'd welcome the company if you don't mind. It's been a long journey and longer still since I've had conversation that wasn't with my horse. The request surprised Tom, but he nodded and took the chair beside the bed, keeping a respectful distance. As Victoria ate, she began to ask questions about the ranch, about the area, about how long he'd lived here. Simple, neutral topics that required little personal disclosure. Tom found himself answering more freely than he might have expected, something in her manner making it easy to speak. The drought's been hard, he admitted. 3 years now with barely enough rain to keep the creek flowing. Lost nearly half my cattle last summer. Would have lost more if not for the old well my father dug. Hits a deep aquifer, never runs dry, even when everything else does. That sounds valuable in these conditions, Victoria observed, especially with the railroad company buying up land throughout the territory. Tom's expression darkened. You've heard about that. It was discussed in every town I passed through. Western Frontier Railroad, isn't it? They're apparently offering good prices. They can keep their prices, Tom said flatly. This land's been in my family since before the Republic. Not interested in selling at any price. Victoria studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. They say the railroad brings prosperity. They say a lot of things. What it brings is change, and not all change is for the better. Tom stood abruptly. You should rest, Mrs. Thornton. Doctor in town says the best cure for a concussion is sleep. Victoria set aside her empty bowl. Thank you for the meal and for your candor, Mr. McGrady. I won't forget either. Tom nodded awkwardly and retreated to the main room, leaving the door ajar in case she called for assistance. He settled into his chair by the fire, thoughts turning over the strange circumstances that had brought Victoria Thornton to his door. Boston society women didn't typically travel alone through the Texas Panhandle, especially not during the worst drought in living memory, with tensions running high over land and water rights. Something wasn't adding up, but it wasn't his place to question her. Come morning, he'd ride into town, see about arranging transportation for her to the nearest proper settlement where she could wire for assistance. By this time tomorrow, she'd be on her way, and his life would return to its familiar solitude. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, Tom found himself listening to the soft sounds of his guests settling into sleep and wondering what she was running from, because people who traveled as she had were always running from something or someone. Outside, the wind continued to howl, driving sand and secrets against the walls of Broken Creek Ranch. But Sheriff William Jenkins had seen enough of life to know trouble on sight, and the 4 men who rode into Gentry that morning were trouble wearing expensive boots. Their leader, a slender man in his mid-30s, with a tailored suit too fine for trail dust, dismounted with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His companions remained mounted, hard men with trail-worn faces and holsters worn smooth from frequent use. Looking for the law in this establishment, the well-dressed man announced as he pushed through the doors of the sheriff's office. Jenkins didn't bother standing from behind his desk. At 60, with a bad back from a Yankee mini-ball at Shiloh, and 30 years of wearing a badge, he'd earned the right to receive visitors seated. Found him, Jenkins replied, eyeing the newcomer. Sheriff William Jenkins, And you might be. The man removed his hat, revealing meticulously styled dark hair without a speck of trail dust. Marcus Sterling, representing Western Frontier Railroad. A pleasure, Sheriff. Jenkins kept his expression neutral. Another railroad man. They'd been thick as flies on a carcass these past months, buying up land, making promises, stirring up the kind of excitement that inevitably led to disappointment in these parts. What brings Western Frontier to my jurisdiction? Mr. Sterling already got two railroads fighting over right-of-way through the county. Sterling smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. We're not interested in fighting, Sheriff. Western Frontier prefers cooperation. We're surveying potential routes for a new line from St. Louis to El Paso. Would bring considerable commerce to towns along the way. I'm sure it would, Jenkins said dryly. Still doesn't explain what you need from me. Sterling placed his hat on the corner of Jenkins' desk, a small liberty that spoke volumes about how the man viewed his own importance. Information primarily. I understand there was an incident at the Brokenwood Ranch yesterday. Broken Creek, Jenkins corrected automatically. And what incident would that be? My associates and I were surveying property lines when we observed a dust-up. Appeared to be an attack of some sort. Naturally, we were concerned. Jenkins leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking in protest. Tom McGrady's place, if something happened there, it's news to me. Tom tends to handle his own problems. Yes, I've heard Mr. McGrady is somewhat self-sufficient. Sterling's tone suggested this was not entirely a compliment. The incident involved a woman, I believe. We saw her horse go down in the sandstorm. Tried to render assistance, but Mr. McGrady reached her first. Rather forcefully took charge of the situation. Every instinct Jenkins had developed in 30 years of law enforcement told him Sterling was lying about something. Tom McGrady was the last man in the county who'd act forcefully toward a woman in distress. Tom's one of the most decent men in the territory, Jenkins said carefully. If he took charge, as you say, it was because help was needed. Perhaps, Sterling conceded smoothly. However, the woman in question might be someone I'm acquainted with. A Mrs. Victoria Thornton. She was traveling to meet with our company representatives regarding a property matter. Jenkins kept his face impassive, but his interest sharpened. Can't help you there? Haven't heard of any Mrs. Thornton in these parts. Ah, well, if you do encounter her, I'd appreciate being informed. We have business matters to conclude. Sterling produced a calling card and placed it on the desk. My associates and I will be staying at the Gentry House for the foreseeable future. Jenkins didn't touch the card. I'll keep that in mind. Sterling reclaimed his hat, settling it carefully on his perfectly groomed head. One more thing, Sheriff. There are rumors that certain landowners in this region have been reluctant to consider the benefits the railroad could bring. It would be unfortunate if this stubborn provincialism were to impede progress. That a threat, Mr. Sterling? Sterling's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Merely an observation, Sheriff. Change is coming to the West. Those who embrace it will prosper. Those who resist, he shrugged eloquently. Well, history has little patience for obstacles. After Sterling departed, Jenkins remained at his desk for several long minutes, considering the encounter. Finally, he reached for his hat and gun belt. Tom McGrady kept to himself, true enough, but he and Jenkins had an understanding born of shared experience. Both had fought in the war, albeit on opposite sides. Both had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. And both recognized that sometimes trouble needed to be headed off before it truly began. Time to pay a visit to Broken Creek Ranch. Yes. Victoria Thornton was gone when Tom woke at dawn. He'd spent the night in his chair by the fire, giving his guest privacy, and had fallen into the deep sleep of the physically exhausted. Now, heart pounding with sudden alarm, he checked the bedroom to confirm what he already knew. The bed was empty, neatly made with hospital corners his mother would have approved. Tom's first thought was that she'd fled during the night, but a quick survey revealed her saddlebag still in place. His own Mount General remained in the corral. She couldn't have gone far on foot. Relief washed over him when he stepped onto the porch and spotted her at the far end of the ranch yard, standing beside the chicken coop. The morning sun caught her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She'd found one of his mother's old shawls to wrap around her shoulders against the morning chill. Tom approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. As he drew near, he realized she was talking softly to the chickens as she scattered feed from the pail at her feet. And Martha here is clearly the matriarch of your little society, she was saying to a large speckled hen. Quite the commanding presence. I admire a woman who knows her own mind, even if she is a chicken. Despite himself, Tom smiled, the expression so unfamiliar, It almost hurt his face. Her name's actually Hattie, he said after my aunt. Same disposition. Victoria turned a flush, rising to her cheeks at being caught in such a whimsical moment. Mr. McGrady, good morning. I hope you don't mind. I saw the feed pail and thought I might make myself useful. Don't mind at all. Hattie and her ladies are probably pleased to have new company. I'm not much for conversation. Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to something that made Tom's chest tighten unexpectedly. So I've gathered. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to hear you've been making introductions. Tom nodded toward the chickens. They're good listeners, at least. The best kind. Victoria agreed, her smile fading slightly. Mr. McGrady, I want to thank you properly for your kindness yesterday. Not many would have done what you did. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Just did what needed doing. Nevertheless, she took a step closer, looking up at him with those disconcertingly direct green eyes. I owe you my life, and I don't take such debts lightly. No debt between us, Mrs. Thornton. Tom couldn't hold that gaze and looked past her to the distant horizon. How's your head this morning? Victoria touched the bandage at her temple. Better, thank you. I've had worse. The casual admission raised questions Tom wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Instead, he gestured toward the house. Got coffee on. Biscuits too if you're hungry. I'd appreciate that. They walked side by side back to the cabin, an unexpected companionability in the silence between them. Tom found himself acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of lavender that somehow persisted despite her travel, the rustle of her skirts, the way she observed everything with those keen eyes. Inside, Tom busied himself with breakfast preparations, oddly self-conscious about the cabin's sparse furnishings. He'd never given much thought to his surroundings before. It was shelter, nothing more. But seeing it through a stranger's eyes, through her eyes, he suddenly noticed the worn patches in the rug, the mismatched dishes, the general sense of utilitarian neglect. You have a lovely home, Victoria said, as if reading his thoughts. There's an honesty to it I find refreshing. Tom glanced at her sharply, looking for signs of mockery, but found none. It's not much, he said gruffly, but it's mine. That's more than many can say. Victoria seated herself at the rough-hewn table. Tell me about Broken Creek Ranch, Mr. McGrady. How long has your family owned it? The question seemed innocent enough, but something in her tone put Tom slightly on guard. Still, there was no harm in basic history. My father claimed it in '41, just after the Republic was established. Built this cabin with his own hands. Met my mother a year later when her family's wagon train broke down nearby. Tom poured coffee into 2 cups and set one before Victoria. Been McGrady land ever since. Through the war as well, her question was careful neutral. Tom nodded once. Mother ran things while I was away. Did a damn sight better job than I did when I returned, if I'm honest. You fought for the Union, Victoria observed, not a question. Tom's eyes narrowed slightly. What makes you say that? She gestured to the corner of the room where an old Springfield rifle hung on pegs above the fireplace. Model 1861, standard issue for Union forces. You've kept it well maintained for a memento. Tom reassessed his guest. Not many women or men, for that matter, could identify a rifle's model at a glance, much less draw such specific conclusions from it. You know your weapons, Mrs. Thornton. Victoria sipped her coffee, her expression giving away nothing. My late husband was something of an enthusiast. One absorbs such details in marriage. Your husband, Tom said carefully. Judge Sterling's letter mentioned. A sharp knock at the door interrupted him. Tom's hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip before he consciously registered the familiar pattern. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Jenkins. Friend of yours? Victoria asked, noting the gesture. Sheriff Jenkins. Good man, even if he did wear Confederate gray. Tom moved to the door but paused with his hand on the latch. Mrs. Thornton, is there something I should know before I let the law into my home? The directness of the question clearly startled her. For a moment, Victoria seemed to war with herself, indecision flickering across her features. Then her chin lifted slightly. I've broken no laws, Mr. McGrady, but there are those who might claim otherwise. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest enough. Tom nodded once and opened the door. Sheriff William Jenkins stood on the porch, hat in hand, his weathered face grave beneath its gray mustache. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Victoria seated at Tom's table. Tom, he greeted, his tone carefully neutral. Ma'am, hope I'm not interrupting. Sheriff. Tom stepped back, gesturing for Jenkins to enter. Mrs. Victoria Thornton, Sheriff William Jenkins. Victoria inclined her head politely. Sheriff, Jenkins settled his hat back on his head, a subtle signal that this wasn't entirely a social call. Heard there might have been some trouble out this way yesterday. Came to check. Mrs. Thornton's horse went down in the sandstorm, Tom explained. Brought her here to tend a head wound. No trouble beyond that. Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. Glad to hear it. Thing is, Tom, I had visitors this morning asking after a Mrs. Thornton. Man named Marcus Sterling says he represents Western Frontier Railroad. The coffee cup in Victoria's hand clattered against its saucer. Marcus is here, in Gentry. You know him, ma'am? Jenkins asked, though the answer was written plainly in her sudden pallor. Victoria's gaze darted to Tom, then back to the sheriff. He's my late husband's brother. We have unresolved matters between us. Seems mighty concerned about your welfare, Jenkins said. Claimed he saw you taken forcibly from the site of your accident. Tom's jaw tightened. That's a damned lie. Figured as much, Jenkins agreed. But Mr. Sterling strikes me as a man accustomed to his version of events becoming the official record. He's staying in town with 3 men who don't look like typical railroad employees, if you take my meaning. Tom took the meaning perfectly well. Hired guns, then. The kind of men who solve problems permanently for those with enough money to pay. What exactly does Marcus want? Tom asked Victoria. She set down her cup with deliberate care, her composure returning despite the shock. Officially to escort me back to Boston to settle my husband's estate, in reality to ensure I never reach Boston alive. The bluntness of the statement hung in the air. Jenkins and Tom exchanged glances, decades of frontier justice between them, making words unnecessary. A woman claiming her life was in danger would be taken seriously in these parts. Perhaps you'd better explain, Mrs. Thornton, Jenkins said, taking a seat at the table. From the beginning. Victoria looked between the 2 men measuring them. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once and straightened her shoulders. My husband, Charles Thornton, was found dead in his study 6 months ago. A gunshot wound to the head, his own revolver in his hand. Her voice was steady, clinical. The official ruling was suicide brought on by financial troubles. Charles had invested heavily in railroad ventures, including Western Frontier, and lost nearly everything. But you don't believe it was suicide, Tom said. Victoria's gaze met his unwavering. I know it wasn't. Charles discovered something about Western Frontier's operations, something that disturbed him greatly. He was preparing to take his findings to the authorities when he died. And what might those findings be? Jenkins asked. I don't know the details, only that it involved land acquisitions in the Texas Territory water rights and something Charles called the Apache treasure. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. After the funeral, Marcus made it clear that as Charles's only male relative, he expected to assume control of what remained of the estate, including me. When I refused, accidents began to happen. What kind of accidents? Tom's voice had gone dangerously quiet. A runaway carriage nearly struck me in the street. A fire started in my bedroom while I was sleeping. Small doses of arsenic appeared in my tea. Victoria's expression remained composed, but a tremor had entered her voice. After the 3rd attempt, I realized I needed to disappear. I converted what jewelry I could into guimauves and headed west following Charles' notes about his Texas investigations. Jenkins removed his hat again, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. And now Marcus Sterling has followed you here. So it would seem. Victoria's gaze returned to Tom. Mr. McGrady, I've imposed on your hospitality under false pretenses. I should leave before I bring trouble to your door. Tom studied her for a long moment, seeing past the composed exterior to the exhaustion and fear beneath. A woman alone hunted across 1,000 miles of hostile territory, running not just to stay alive, but to uncover the truth about her husband's death. Mrs. Thornton, he said finally, trouble's been at my door since before you arrived. One more variety won't make much difference. You don't understand, Victoria insisted. Marcus is dangerous. He has money influence and men willing to kill on his command. Wouldn't be the first time I've faced such odds, Tom replied, his voice level. Sheriff, what's your assessment? Jenkins considered stroking his mustache thoughtfully. Sterling's already spreading his version of events. Claims Mrs. Thornton is unstable, delusional since her husband's death. Says he's here out of family obligation to bring her home safely. And you believe that? Tom asked. About as much as I believe in rain during a drought. Jenkins turned to Victoria. Ma'am, I don't know you, but I've known Tom McGrady for 15 years. If he's willing to stand with you, that's good enough for me. Victoria looked between them, bewilderment crossing her features. You would help me. A complete stranger against a powerful man with resources and connections. Tom and Jenkins exchanged another glance at the weight of shared experience, evident in the look that passed between them. "Mrs. Thornton," Tom said quietly, "some fights choose you. This land has taught me that much." Before Victoria could respond, a distant sound caught Tom's attention. He moved to the window, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Riders coming," he announced, his body tensing. 4 of them moving fast. Jenkins joined him at the window. "That'll be Sterling and his men, I expect. Not waiting on formalities, are they?" Tom reached for his rifle. "Mrs. Thornton, I believe you're about to meet your brother-in-law again." Victoria rose, fear and determination warring in her expression. "Mr. McGrady, I can't ask you to fight my battles." Tom checked his rifle with practiced efficiency, his movements precise and unhurried despite the approaching danger. "Not asking was involved, ma'am. Some things a man does because they need doing." As the riders drew closer, dust rising behind them like a storm cloud, Tom McGrady took position by the door of Broken Creek Ranch. For the first time in years, he felt the old familiar clarity descending the cold, focused state that had earned him his wartime reputation. The widowmaker awakening from a long slumber. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you might want to make it clear you're the law when they arrive. Would hate to have to shoot a man for doing his job." Jenkins nodded grimly. "And if his job includes harming Mrs. Thornton," Tom's pale blue eyes hardened to the color of winter ice, "then it's no longer his job I'm concerned with." Outside, the riders drew closer, dust billowing in their wake, like the approaching judgment of a vengeful god. The 4 horsemen pulled up 20 yards from the cabin, dust settling around them like a fog. Marcus Sterling sat his black stallion with the easy confidence of a man who'd never known true hardship. Expensively tailored riding clothes, spotless despite the trail dust that should have covered them. A silver-handled revolver gleamed at his hip, ornate, likely more for show than function. The men flanking him were another breed entirely. Trail-hardened, weather-beaten faces beneath worn hats. Eyes that had seen the worst humanity could offer and participated willingly. Their weapons were functional, well used. The kind that had taken lives before and would again without hesitation. But it was the 4th man who drew Tom's attention. Tall and lean, with a face that seemed carved from the same harsh landscape that surrounded them. His mount, a dun Mustang with intelligent eyes, was positioned slightly apart from the others. The distance was subtle but deliberate. This man rode with Sterling, but wasn't of Sterling's company. "That's Cole Hardin on the dun," Jenkins murmured beside Tom. "Former cavalry scout. Fought for the Union like yourself. Has a reputation for tracking anything that leaves a shadow." Tom gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, never taking his eyes from the riders. "And the other 2? Hired guns. Fisher and Daltrey, not local. Word is they followed Sterling from Chicago." Victoria stood several paces behind them, just inside the door. "Marcus always did prefer to let others handle his dirty work," she said quietly. Sterling urged his mount forward a few steps. "Mrs. Thornton, what a fortunate discovery. We've been quite concerned for your safety since your disappearance." His voice carried the practiced charm of a man accustomed to manipulating rooms full of investors. Tom stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. "Mr. Sterling, this is private property." Sterling's smile didn't falter, though his eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Tom's stance and the easy way he held his weapon. "Ah, you have me at a disadvantage, sir." "Thomas McGrady, this is my ranch you're trespassing on." "McGrady." Sterling repeated the name thoughtfully. "The name isn't familiar, though the property certainly is. Broken Creek Ranch, if I'm not mistaken. A rather modest operation." The slight pause made the word an insult. Sheriff Jenkins stepped forward, the sun glinting off his badge. "Mr. Sterling, I thought we had an understanding back in town. Mrs. Thornton is under Mr. McGrady's protection as his guest. Unless you've got official business here. But I do, Sheriff." Sterling's smile widened. "Family business. Victoria is my responsibility since my poor brother's passing. Her delicate condition requires proper care." Victoria emerged from the doorway, her chin lifted in defiance despite the fear Tom could sense radiating from her. "I am neither delicate nor your responsibility, Marcus. Return to Boston and leave me in peace." "My dear sister." Sterling's voice dripped with false concern. "You're clearly not yourself. The shock of Charles' death has affected your reason. These gentlemen you've fallen in with can't possibly understand your situation." Tom studied the 3 men accompanying Sterling. Fisher and Daltrey were watching Jenkins and himself, hands never straying far from their weapons. professional assessing the threat. But Hardin was different. His gaze swept the property methodically, taking in details most would miss. The fresh hoof prints near the corral, the recently repaired fence post, the well-maintained windmill creaking in the breeze. Mr. McGrady, Sterling continued, his attention shifting fully to Tom. I understand you've shown my sister-in-law hospitality, and I'm grateful. But Victoria requires specialized care that only family can provide. Surely you understand. What I understand, Tom replied evenly, is that Mrs. Thornton doesn't appear eager for your company. Sterling's pleasant mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Her wishes are regrettably secondary to her welfare. The courts have granted me guardianship until her mental state improves. It was a bald-faced lie, and everyone present knew it. Tom's grip tightened imperceptibly on his rifle. Show me the papers, Jenkins demanded. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. All properly filed in Boston. I didn't realize I'd need to carry legal documents to retrieve my own family member. Then you'll need to return to Boston and get them, Jenkins said firmly. Until I see official documentation, Mrs. Thornton is free to remain wherever she chooses. A tense silence fell. Fisher and Daltrey exchanged glances, their hands drifting closer to their weapons. Tom subtly shifted his stance, bringing his rifle into a position where it could be raised and fired in one fluid motion if needed. It was Hardin who broke the standoff. Sun's getting high, he observed, his voice a rough drawl that seemed to match the landscape. Be ashamed to waste the day's good riding hours. He turned to Sterling. Legal matters take time, Mr. Sterling. Might be best to return to town, send for those papers you mentioned. Sterling's jaw tightened, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded. A prudent suggestion, Mr. Hardin. Very well. He fixed Victoria with a cold stare. I'll return, sister dear, with all the necessary documentation to resolve this misunderstanding. Until then, Tom said, I'd appreciate if you'd keep to town, Mr. Sterling. Private property means something in these parts. Indeed it does, Mr. McGrady. Sterling's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. Indeed it does. Sheriff, perhaps you'd be good enough to accompany us back to Gentry. I'd value your insights on local customs. Jenkins hesitated, glancing at Tom and Victoria. You two gonna to be all right here? Tom nodded once. We'll manage. I'll return this evening, Jenkins promised, then turned to the mounted men. Mr. Sterling, after you. As the riders turned to their horses, Cole Hardin lingered a moment longer than the others. His gaze met Tom's, a flash of recognition passing between them, not of faces but of experience. The shared understanding of men who had seen battle, who recognized in each other the capacity for necessary violence. Then he was gone, following the others, in a cloud of dust that stretched across the dry landscape like a portent. Victoria released a shaky breath as the riders disappeared from view. He'll be back, with more men most likely. Most likely, Tom agreed, lowering his rifle. But not today, that buys us time. Time for what Marcus won't stop until he gets what he wants. He never does. Tom turned to study her, taking full measure of the woman who'd brought this storm to his door. Despite her fear, there was a steel core to Victoria Thornton that he recognized and respected. She wasn't a wilting flower seeking protection. She was a fighter who'd run out of places to run. Mrs. Thornton, he said finally, I think it's time you told me everything about your husband, about Sterling, and about what this Apache treasure might be that's worth killing over. Victoria hesitated, then nodded slowly. You're right, Mr. McGrady. You've put yourself at risk for my sake. You deserve the full truth. She looked toward the horizon where dust still marked the rider's passage. But not here, somewhere safer if such a place exists. Tom considered this, then gestured toward the barn. Saddle up then, I know just the place. Which time? The old line shack stood on the northernmost edge of Broken Creek Ranch, nestled against a limestone outcropping that provided shelter from the wind and prying eyes alike. Tom's grandfather had built it in the early days of the Republic, when Comanche raids were still common, and a man needed refugees scattered across his property. It wasn't much a single room with a stone fireplace, narrow windows designed more for defense than light, and walls thick enough to stop arrows and most bullets. No one comes out this way anymore, Tom explained as he dismounted, helping Victoria down from the spare mare he'd saddled for her. Not since the drought dried up the North Creek. Sterling and his men won't think to look here. Victoria studied the humble structure with appreciation. Your family built with purpose, Mr. McGrady. This place would be defensible even against superior numbers. Tom glanced at her sharply. You have an eye for such things. My husband collected military histories. I helped him research. She smiled faintly. And I told you I absorbed more than most wives might during my marriage. Inside the line shack was spare but serviceable. Tom lit a fire in the small hearth more for light than warmth in the growing heat of the day. Victoria settled on a rough-hewn bench, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion Tom could read in the lines around her eyes. Start at the beginning, Tom suggested, taking a seat on an upturned crate across from her. How did your husband become involved with Western Frontier Railroad? Victoria's hands twisted in her lap, the only outward sign of her discomfort. Charles inherited a shipping business from his father. Modest by Boston standards, but profitable. When railroads began expanding westward, he saw an opportunity to diversify. Marcus, who'd been working as a land speculator, convinced him to invest heavily in Western Frontier. And it went badly. Not at first. The initial returns were promising. Then about a year ago, Marcus approached Charles with a new opportunity, something that would transform Western Frontier from a regional carrier into a national power. It required significant additional investment. Let me guess, Tom said dryly. Your husband provided the funds. Victoria nodded. Charles mortgaged everything our home, the shipping business, even my mother's jewelry, all for what Marcus called the Texas acquisition. Land for the railroad. That's what Charles believed, but something changed. Last March, Charles received a package from someone in Texas, a former associate of Marcus, who'd had an attack of conscience, apparently. I never saw the contents, but that night, Charles locked himself in his study with his maps and documents. When he emerged the next morning, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What did he tell you? Only that Marcus had deceived him, that the Texas acquisition wasn't primarily about railroad expansion at all. It was about controlling something far more valuable. Victoria's gaze met Tom's. Water. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. In 3 years of drought, water had become more precious than gold across the Texas panhandle. Charles began gathering evidence, Victoria continued. He said Marcus and his partners were systematically acquiring land along a specific corridor land that appeared worthless to most, but that contained something they called the Apache Waterway. Tom's expression grew grave. There are stories, old Apache legends about an underground river that never runs dry, even in the worst drought. Most consider it a myth. Marcus doesn't believe it's a myth, Victoria said. And neither did Charles. Whatever was in that package convinced him that Marcus had found something real, a network of underground springs or aquifers that could control water access for half the territory. And with the drought, Tom didn't need to finish the thought. Whoever controls the water controls everything, Victoria concluded. Charles was preparing to take his evidence to federal authorities when he died. Tom rose, moving to the small window. The landscape stretched out before him, parched and desperate under the merciless sun. 3 years without proper rain had pushed ranchers and farmers to the brink. Men had killed for far less than what Victoria was describing. You believe Marcus murdered your husband, he said finally. Made it look like suicide. I know he did. Victoria's voice hardened. Charles wasn't a perfect man, Mr. McGrady, but he had integrity. When he discovered what Marcus was planning, he couldn't stay silent, even knowing it would ruin him financially. And after his death, you became the next target. I was inconvenient. The clinical detachment in her voice couldn't quite mask the pain beneath. As Charles' widow, I had certain legal rights to question the disposition of his estate. Marcus needed me either controlled or eliminated. Tom turned back to face her. And you ran all the way to Texas. Victoria's chin lifted slightly. I ran to find the truth. Charles kept mentioning a place called Broken Creek in his notes. Said it was the key to the whole enterprise. I didn't know if it was a town, a landmark, or a ranch, Tom finished for her. My ranch. I didn't know, Mr. McGrady. Not until Sheriff Jenkins mentioned the name yesterday. It can't be coincidence. Tom was silent for a long moment, piecing together the implications. The well my father dug. It's never run dry, not even now when every creek and pond for 50 miles has turned to dust. He always said we were blessed to find water where others couldn't. Or your father found something others didn't know to look for, Victoria suggested. Something the Apache knew about long before settlers arrived. A chill ran down Tom's spine despite the day's heat. You think my ranch sits on top of this Apache waterway? I think Marcus Sterling believes it does, and he's willing to kill to control it. The gravity of the situation settled over Tom like a physical weight. This wasn't just about offering sanctuary to a woman in trouble anymore. This was about his land, his legacy, and potentially the survival of every ranch and farm for miles around. Mrs. Thornton, he said finally, I believe it's time we did some investigating of our own. The county records office in Gentry occupied the back room of what had once been the town's first general store. Now it housed dusty ledgers and land surveys dating back to the Republic overseen by Ezra Wilmington, a former school teacher who'd lost an arm at Antietam and found a quieter life cataloging the ownership of dirt. Tom McGrady, Wilmington greeted, looking up from his ledger as Tom entered. Twice in town in a week. Must be the end times. Ezra, Tom nodded, removing his hat. Need to look up some records on my property. Your property? Wilmington raised a bushy eyebrow. Thought you knew every rock and scrub brush on that land. Looking for something that might be under those rocks. Tom approached the counter. Old surveys, maybe. Anything that mentions water sources. Wilmington studied him curiously. This have anything to do with those railroad fellows been sniffing around? Tom hesitated. Might be. Wilmington stroked his beard thoughtfully. Been a lot of interest in old records lately. That fancy-dressed Sterling was in here 2 days ago with a court order to examine surveys from before the annexation. Tom's interest sharpened. What kind of surveys? Spanish land grants mostly, and some old army maps from when they were fighting the Apache. Wilmington leaned forward, lowering his voice. Made copies of everything. Offered me $20 to keep it quiet. Did you? Wilmington snorted. For $20, man insults me. Now, if he'd offered $50, he winked. Records are public, Tom. Railroad money don't change that. I'd be obliged if you could show me what he was so interested in. Wilmington disappeared into the stacks, returning minutes later with several rolled maps and a leather-bound ledger. Spanish survey from 1824, he explained, unrolling the first map carefully. Shows water sources known to the original land grant holders. Tom leaned over the yellowed parchment eyes, tracking across the faded lines and Spanish notations. The landmarks were recognizable if crudely drawn: the ridgeline to the north, the bend in what was now called the Brazos River, the distinctive mesa that marked the western edge of his property. But it was the spidery blue lines crossing the map that caught his attention. They didn't match any creeks or streams. He knew they ran deeper beneath the visible landscape. What are these markings? Tom asked, tracing one of the blue lines with his finger. Wilmington squinted at the notation. My Spanish ain't what it used to be, but I believe that says agua profunda, deep water. Underground springs, more likely aquifers. The Spanish were always looking for reliable water sources. Wilmington unrolled another map, this one clearly American in origin, dated 1840. Army survey conducted right after annexation. See how they've marked some of the same waterways, but added these notations. Tom studied the second map. The same blue lines appeared, but with additional markings at certain junctions. One such marking sat directly beneath what would later become Broken Creek Ranch. What does this symbol mean? Tom asked, pointing to the marking. Wilmington adjusted his spectacles. That there's from the Apache language. Army Scout must have had a native guide. Roughly translates to medicine water or spirit water, depending on who's doing the translating. Tom straightened, a chill running through him, despite the office's stuffy heat. His father had always claimed the well water had healing properties. Tom had dismissed it as an old man's fancy, but now, Ezra, he said quietly, I'd like copies of these maps. And anything else Sterling was interested in. Wilmington nodded slowly. Take some time, and might cost you a bottle of that corn whiskey you don't admit to making. 2 bottles, Tom agreed. And Ezra, I'd appreciate if you'd keep my interest as quiet as you kept Sterling's. The old clerk's eyes twinkled. What interest would that be, Tom? Don't recall you being here at all today. Victoria was waiting at the prearranged spot behind the livery stable, her borrowed mare tethered beside a water trough. She'd exchanged her torn traveling dress for more practical attire, a simple skirt and shirtwaist purchased from the general store with a man's duster over top that Tom recognized as belonging to Jenkins. Did you find anything? She asked as Tom dismounted. Maybe. He glanced around to ensure they weren't observed, then pulled the folded maps from inside his vest. Spanish surveys from before the Republic show what might be underground waterways running through my property. Victoria's eyes widened as she examined the maps. Charles had drawings similar to these in his study the night he died. I'm certain of it. There's more. Tom pointed to the Apache symbol. This marking sits right where my father dug our well. He always said the water there was special, claimed it could heal the sick and make barren land fertile. You believe it? Tom hesitated. Never gave it much thought. But our wells never run dry, even now when every other water source has failed, and our cattle survive where others starve. Victoria traced the blue lines on the map, her finger following their path across the territory. These connect to other properties as well. Every ranch and farm Sterling's been trying to buy, Tom confirmed. He's acquiring land along the entire system. Once he controls the access points, he controls the water. And during a drought, he could name his price, Tom finished grimly. Men would pay anything, do anything to save their land and livestock. Victoria folded the maps carefully. What do we do now? Before Tom could answer, the livery doors burst open. Cole Hardin emerged leading his dun Mustang. He froze when he saw Tom and Victoria, his hand dropping instinctively to his sidearm. For a long, tense moment, the three stood in silent tableau. Then deliberately, Hardin moved his hand away from his weapon. "McGrady," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Mrs. Thornton." Tom positioned himself subtly between Victoria and the tracker. "Hardin, interesting reading material you've got there," Hardin observed, nodding toward the maps Victoria had hastily concealed. "Old Spanish surveys, if I'm not mistaken, showing things that don't appear on more recent maps." Tom's hand moved closer to his own revolver. "You seem well informed." "I make it my business to be." Hardin's gaze shifted to Victoria. Just like the lady here made it her business to follow her husband's research all the way from Boston. Victoria stiffened. "You've been watching me." "Tracking you," Hardin corrected. "Since St. Louis. Sterling hired me to find you, not to decide what happens after." "And now you have," Tom said. "What happens next?" Hardin considered this, absently stroking his Mustang's neck. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether what Sterling's planning is something I want to be part of." Hardin's expression remained impassive, but something in his tone had shifted. Was hired to track, not to kill. Especially not a woman whose only crime was asking inconvenient questions. Victoria stepped forward, ignoring Tom's warning glance. "You know what Marcus is doing, what he's planning. I know he's paying top dollar for land most would consider worthless." Hardin shrugged. "Man's entitled to make poor business decisions." "It's not poor business," Victoria insisted. "It's calculated theft on a massive scale. He's planning to control water access for the entire region." Hardin's eyes narrowed slightly. "That what your husband discovered?" "Yes, and Marcus killed him for it." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant sounds of the town and the soft nickering of the horses. Hardin's gaze shifted to Tom. "You're standing with her on this." It wasn't a question, but Tom answered anyway. "I am." "Why not your fight?" "It's my land," Tom said simply. "My water." Hardin nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied something for him. "Sterling's bringing in more men." 6 arrived on the afternoon stage. Professional guns from Chicago. Victoria paled. "He's planning something." "Tonight," Hardin confirmed. "Heard him telling Fisher to prepare for a night ride. Didn't specify where, but—" "Broken Creek," Tom finished. "He's done waiting for legal pretense." Hardin didn't disagree. "Been in this business a long time, McGrady. Know when something doesn't smell right. Sterling smells wrong." "Are you offering to help?" Victoria asked, disbelief evident in her tone. "Offering information," Hardin corrected. "What you do with it is your affair." He swung into his saddle with fluid grace. "Sterling expects me back with a report on your movements. Might take my time delivering it." Tom studied the man carefully. "Why tell us this?" Hardin was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "Fought in the war, same as you. Different reasons, maybe, but same mud, same blood. After that, there are lines a man doesn't cross." With that cryptic statement, he touched the brim of his hat in a minimal gesture of respect, then guided his mount toward the street. Before he disappeared around the corner, he paused. "McGrady, you still shoot the way they say you did at Gettysburg?" The question caught Tom off guard. "Been a long time since I aimed at anything but game." Hardin nodded thoughtfully. "Might want to remember how." "Tonight." Then he was gone, leaving Tom and Victoria alone with the weight of his warning. "Can we trust him?" Victoria asked quietly. "Don't know," Tom admitted, "but we don't have the luxury of ignoring the warning." He untied their horses from the hitching post. "We need to get back to the ranch. Now." "What about Sheriff Jenkins?" "We'll send word, but we can't wait for him." Tom helped Victoria into her saddle. "If Sterling's bringing that many guns, he's not planning to make arrests. He's planning to eliminate witnesses and take what he wants." Victoria gathered her reins, her face set with determination despite the fear Tom could read in her eyes. "Then we'll need to be ready for him. As they rode hard for Broken Creek Ranch, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the drought-stricken land. Tom's thoughts raced ahead, cataloging weapons, defensible positions, escape routes if things went badly. One thing was certain: Marcus Sterling wasn't the only one who would have surprises waiting tonight. The sun had dipped all below the horizon by the time they reached Broken Creek, painting the sky in violent shades of red and gold. Tom immediately set Victoria to gathering essential supplies while he checked his weapons. The old Springfield rifle came down from its place above the fireplace, along with a wooden box containing cartridges he'd kept more out of sentiment than expectation of use. "Will Jenkins bring help?" Victoria asked as she packed food and medical supplies into saddlebags. Tom checked the rifle's action, the familiar motion bringing back memories he'd spent years trying to forget. "If he can, but Sterling's men will be watching the trails. Might not get word to him in time. Then we're on our own." "Not entirely." Tom placed the rifle on the table and moved to the window, scanning the darkening landscape. "Frank Whitaker's place is about 5 miles east. Old Confederate, but a good man. He's been having water troubles of his own, might have a stake in this fight. Can we reach him before Sterling's men arrive?" Tom shook his head. "No time, but there's someone closer." He turned to Victoria, his expression grave. "Mrs. Thornton, how do you feel about ghost stories?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "I'm not sure I understand." "There are stories about these lands, about a guardian spirit that watches over the water. Apache legends." Tom hesitated, then continued. "When I was a boy, my father took me to meet a man he said was the last of his people to know the old ways. A medicine man named Cheyenne." Victoria's eyes widened with understanding. "The Apache who knew about the waterways." Tom nodded. "Father said Cheyenne showed him where to dig our well. Most folks think the old man died years ago. Some say his spirit still guards the water. But you know differently. I know Cheyenne lives in a canyon about a mile north of here. Keeps to himself, doesn't bother with white men's troubles." Tom began loading cartridges into the rifle. "He might not help us, but he deserves warning about what's coming." Victoria was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "These men Sterling's bringing, they won't hesitate to kill anyone who stands in their way." "No, they won't." Tom's voice was steady, but Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he handled the weapons. This wasn't a man eager for violence, but one who recognized its necessity. "Mr. McGrady," she said quietly, "I've brought this danger to your door. I would understand if you chose to leave to save yourself." Tom paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his pale eyes seemed to hold the same intensity as the distant lightning, now flickering on the horizon, the promise of a storm that might never reach this parched land. "Mrs. Thornton," he replied, "I haven't run from a fight in my life, not about to start now, especially not when it's for something worth fighting for." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, carrying weight beyond the immediate danger they faced. Victoria held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement of shared purpose that transcended their brief acquaintance. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats, a single rider approaching fast from the direction of town. Tom moved to the window, rifle ready. "It's Jenkins," he announced, relief evident in his voice. "And he's riding like the devil himself is on his heels." They met the sheriff at the door as he dismounted, his horse lathered and blowing hard from the punishing pace. Jenkins' face was grim, a fresh bruise darkening his left cheekbone. "Sterling's men caught me leaving town," he reported without preamble. "Tried to detain me at the jail. Had to fight my way out." "How many men?" Tom asked. "At least 10, maybe more. Armed to the teeth." Jenkins accepted the canteen Victoria offered, taking a grateful swallow. "They're coming, Tom. Tonight. No pretense of legality about it." Tom nodded, having expected as much. "How long do we have?" "They were gathering when I left. An hour, maybe less." "Time enough." Tom turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Thornton, gather the rest of the supplies. We're not making our stand here." Victoria looked confused. "But the ranch is just buildings," Tom finished. "The land is what matters. And I know this land better than any man alive." He turned back to Jenkins. "Can you still ride?" The old sheriff straightened, indignation flashing across his weathered features. "Been riding since before you were born, boy." Tom's mouth quirked in the ghost of a smile. "Good, because we're about to pay a visit to a ghost." As they prepared to leave, Victoria paused in the doorway, looking back at the simple cabin that had offered her first true shelter in months of running. "What will happen to your home?" Tom secured the Springfield rifle in its scabbard on his saddle, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Sterling wants what's beneath the land, not what's on it, but if he's the man you describe, he won't leave witnesses or evidence. He'll burn it, Victoria realized. Everything. Tom nodded once, mounting his horse with practiced ease. Let him. Home isn't a building, Mrs. Thornton. It's the land beneath your feet and the sky above your head. He extended a hand, helping her onto her mare. And some things are worth losing everything to protect. As they rode away from Broken Creek Ranch, the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, cold, distant witnesses to the struggle about to unfold beneath them. Behind them, the horizon glowed with the approaching torches of Sterling's men, like the advance guard of a prairie fire bearing down on everything Tom McGrady had spent his life building. Ahead lay darkness, uncertainty, and their only chance at survival. The narrow canyon appeared as little more than a shadow against shadows, a vertical gash in the earth that most eyes would pass over without notice. Tom guided them toward it with the confidence of a man traversing familiar ground. Though Victoria noted he hadn't been on this path for some time, branches had grown across the trail, forcing them to duck low over their horses' necks. Not much farther, he said, voice barely above a whisper. The night had fully claimed the land, now a quarter moon, providing just enough light to distinguish shapes from deeper darkness. Keep quiet. Cheyenne doesn't welcome visitors at the best of times. Jenkins brought his mount alongside Tom's. Been 15 years since I laid eyes on the old medicine man, he murmured. Most folks in town think he's long dead. He prefers it that way, Tom replied. Victoria followed closely, every sense alert to the unfamiliar terrain. The parched landscape had given way to something different here. The air felt heavier, carrying a hint of moisture that had been absent elsewhere. Vegetation grew more densely along the canyon walls, silhouettes of scrub oak and juniper breaking the clean lines of stone. The trail narrowed further, forcing them to proceed in single file. Tom dismounted, gesturing for the others to do the same. Have to lead the horses from here. Ground gets treacherous. He wasn't exaggerating. The path descended steeply, switchbacking down the canyon wall. In daylight, it would have been challenging. In the meager moonlight, it was treacherous. Victoria found herself grateful for the sturdy boots she'd purchased in town as loose shale slid beneath her feet. At the canyon floor, the world changed. The dry creek bed that had begun the descent widened, and to Victoria's astonishment, water flowed, a narrow but steady stream that caught the moonlight in silver ripples. After months in drought-stricken territories, the sound of running water seemed almost miraculous. The springs had been flowing since before the Spanish arrived, Tom explained, noting her wonder. Apache called it the weeping eye of the Earth Mother. It should have dried up years ago in this drought, Jenkins observed. According to most, it did. Tom led them along the stream's edge. Cheyenne made sure the maps were redrawn, the trails obscured, kept this place safe from those who'd exploit it. Like Sterling, Victoria said, like many before him. Tom stopped, raising a hand for silence. We're here. At first, Victoria saw nothing but canyon walls and shadows. Then as her eyes adjusted, she discerned a dwelling built into the very rock face, a shelter half cave, half structure, its contours blending so perfectly with the natural stone that it seemed an organic extension of the canyon itself. No light showed from within, but Tom approached with the reverence of one entering sacred ground. He stopped several yards from what Victoria now recognized as a doorway covered by a woven blanket. Cheyenne, Tom called, not loudly but clearly. It's Thomas McGrady, Ellen's son. Silence answered him. The stream burbled nearby, and somewhere an owl called, once its cry echoing off the canyon walls. Victoria held her breath, sensing they were being observed, though she could see no one. Jenkins shifted uneasily. Maybe he's... I know who you are, Thomas McGrady. The voice came from behind them, causing all three to whirl in surprise. An old man stood where moments before there had been only shadow, as if he had materialized from the darkness itself. He was tall and straight, despite his advanced years, his face a map of deep lines that spoke of a century of sun and wind. Long white hair hung in two braids over a faded blue shirt that might once have belonged to a cavalry officer. Most striking were his eyes, black as the canyon shadows, but reflecting the moonlight like water, taking in the three intruders with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh to bone. Cheyenne, Tom acknowledged, inclining his head slightly. Been a long time. Not long enough for you to forget the way. The old man's English was perfect, his voice deep and resonant, despite his age. His gaze shifted to Jenkins. Sheriff, still enforcing the white man's laws on stolen land. Jenkins removed his hat awkwardly. Still keeping the peace best I can, Cheyenne. The Apache's attention finally settled on Victoria, studying her with an intensity that made her straighten her spine instinctively. You bring a woman who carries death on her shadow, he observed. Why? The question hung in the air, directed at Tom, but somehow encompassing all of them. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Men are coming, Tom said simply. Men who want to take the water. Something flickered across Cheyenne's impassive features, concern perhaps, or anger quickly controlled. The water is not for taking, it belongs to no man. These men don't share that view. Tom gestured toward Victoria. Mrs. Thornton's husband discovered their plans. They killed him for it. Cheyenne regarded Victoria anew. And now they hunt you, Boston widow. Victoria blinked in surprise at the accuracy of the address. Yes, my brother-in-law, Marcus Sterling. He represents the Western Frontier Railroad, but their true interest is controlling water rights throughout the territory. The Iron Horse always brings thirst, Cheyenne said cryptically. He turned, gesturing for them to follow. Come, we will speak inside. The dwelling's interior was larger than it appeared from outside, extending deep into the canyon wall. A small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising through a natural chimney in the rock ceiling. The walls were adorned with painted symbols similar to those Tom had seen on the old maps, interspersed with more practical items, cooking implements, weapons, bundles of herbs hanging to dry. Cheyenne settled cross-legged beside the fire, indicating they should sit opposite him. The water you speak of is not one spring, but many, he began without preamble. A river that flows beneath the earth, connecting all that lives above it. The Apache waterway, Victoria said. Cheyenne's expression hardened slightly. That is the white man's name. We call it Nahuti, to the veins of Mother Earth. For 1,000 years, my people protected its secret. Then came the drought of 1815, and a young brave took pity on a Spanish family dying of thirst. He showed them one of the springs, Tom guessed. He showed them how to listen for water beneath the ground, Cheyenne corrected. A mistake. The Spanish made maps. Maps found their way to other white men. Secrets once told cannot be untold. Jenkins leaned forward. Sterling has those maps. He's buying every property that sits above this underground river. He already controls most access points, Victoria added. Broken Creek Ranch is one of the few he doesn't own. Cheyenne's gaze shifted to Tom. Your father knew to dig in the listening place because I showed him. He was a good man who respected the water's spirit. You are his son. What kind of man are you, Thomas McGrady? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Tom met the old Apache's eyes steadily. A man who believes water should flow free, he answered, not be bought and sold for profit. Something like approval flickered in Cheyenne's expression. And you would fight for this belief? I would. Cheyenne studied him a moment longer, then nodded once decision made. He rose in a fluid motion belying his years and moved to the back of the dwelling, returning with a rolled hide. Spreading it before the fire revealed a map more detailed than any Victoria had seen, the entire network of underground waterways stretching from the mountains to the east, beneath what was now Broken Creek Ranch and continuing south toward the border. This is the true map, Cheyenne said. The Spanish saw only pieces. Your father knew of one spring, but all are connected, fed by the mountain's snowmelt through stone channels older than mankind. Tom studied the map intently. The main access point is on my land. The deepest shaft, yes, what your people would call an artesian well. Cheyenne traced a gnarled finger along a particular channel. In the old days, my people would perform ceremonies at this place, asking the water spirits for blessing before the dry season. Victoria leaned closer. The Apache treasure Charles mentioned in his notes, it wasn't gold at all. It was this map. Water is the only true wealth in desert lands, Cheyenne confirmed. This knowledge is the treasure your husband discovered. Jenkins removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. Sterling knows about the main shaft. That's why he's so determined to get Tom's land by law or by force. The shaft is not merely a well, Cheyenne said. It connects to a larger chamber, what my people called the mother pool. From there, the water flows to all other springs in the territory. Tom's expression grew grave as understanding dawned. Control the mother pool. Control all water, Victoria finished softly. In a drought like this, that's power beyond measure. Power to determine who lives and who dies, Cheyenne agreed. Your railroad man understands this. The implications hung heavy in the firelit air. Tom rose, moving to the dwelling's entrance to look out at the night sky. The quarter moon had risen higher, casting enough light to silhouette the canyon walls against the star-filled heavens. Sterling and his men will be at the ranch by now, he said. When they don't find us, they'll start searching. They won't find this place easily. Jenkins assured him. Trail's too well hidden. Hardin might, Tom countered. If he's truly working for Sterling, Mann's reputation as a tracker is well earned. Victoria joined Tom at the entrance, her expression troubled. You think he might have been lying about warning us? Hard to know a man's true intentions. Tom's gaze remained on the distant horizon where the faintest glow suggested the ranch buildings might already be burning. War teaches you that much. I remember Cole Hardin, Jenkins said, coming to stand beside them. Rode with Sherman through Georgia. Had a reputation even then for being able to find anything or anyone no matter how well hidden. Cheyenne had remained seated by the fire watching their conversation with inscrutable eyes. Now he spoke, his voice carrying easily to them. The tracker comes, he said simply, alone. All three turned to him in alarm. How do you know? Jenkins demanded. The old Apache made a dismissive gesture. The canyon speaks to those who know how to listen. One rider, moving carefully, he follows your trail. Tom's hand moved to his revolver. How far? He crosses the rim now. Cheyenne rose smoothly, decides whether to descend in darkness. Victoria felt cold fear settle in her stomach. If Hardin had tracked them here, Sterling and his men couldn't be far behind. Their sanctuary was about to become a trap. Tom made a swift decision. Jenkins, get Mrs. Thornton deeper into the canyon. There's a narrow passage about a quarter-mile upstream that leads to higher ground. And you, Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. Going to have a conversation with our tracker. Tom checked his revolver, then reached for the Springfield rifle he'd propped by the doorway. Find out whose side he's really on. You can't face him alone, Victoria protested. Better odds than facing him with Sterling's whole crew, Tom countered. He turned to Cheyenne. If things go badly, get them to Frank Whitaker's place. He'll help. The old Apache studied him with those depthless, black eyes. And if the tracker kills you, then you were right about what kind of man I am, Tom replied evenly, and they'll need to find someone better to protect the water. Something passed between the two men, a understanding beyond words. Cheyenne inclined his head slightly. I will guide them if necessary. Jenkins looked like he might argue, but years of frontier pragmatism won out. He checked his own weapon, then turned to Victoria. Ma'am, we should prepare to move if needed. Victoria wanted to object further, but the resolute set of Tom's jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she stepped closer, placed a hand briefly on his arm. Be careful, Mr. McGrady. The touch seemed to surprise Tom. For a moment, his hard expression softened. Always am Mrs. Thornton. Then he was gone, melting into the canyon's shadows with a stealth that spoke of years navigating this landscape. Victoria watched until he disappeared, completely wondering if she'd just witnessed the last moments of a man who'd risked everything to help a stranger. Cheyenne moved to stand beside her, his presence somehow reassuring despite his advanced age. He carries the burden well, the old man observed. Your coming has awakened what slept within him. Victoria glanced at him sharply. What do you mean? The warrior's heart. It never truly dies, only waits for purpose. Cheyenne turned, gathering items from around his dwelling with purposeful efficiency. Now we prepare, for his return or for flight. Lord. Tom moved through this canyon like a ghost, each step placed with deliberate care to avoid loose stone or dry brush that might betray his position. The quarter moon cast just enough light to navigate by illuminating the path he'd traveled countless times as a boy under Cheyenne's tutelage. Those had been different days before the war, before he'd learned how easily men died, before he'd become the instrument of so many deaths himself. Cheyenne had taught him to track game, to move unseen through the landscape, to understand the language of wind and stone and water. Skills meant for survival, not killing. Ironic that he now employed them for both. Tom positioned himself on a natural ledge halfway up the canyon wall, where the trail made its steepest descent. Anyone coming down would be silhouetted against the night sky at this point, most vulnerable, as they navigated the treacherous switchback. He settled the Springfield against his shoulder, the familiar weight like an unwelcome reunion with an old friend. Through the rifle's sight, he could clearly see the rim where Hardin would appear if Cheyenne's warning proved accurate. Minutes passed, stretching toward a half hour. Tom remained motionless, his breathing slow and controlled, as he'd been taught by a grizzled sergeant at Antietam. A man could wait forever if the shot mattered enough. Movement flickered at the canyon's edge, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows. Tom adjusted his aim, fractionally centering the sight on the approaching figure. The distance was considerable, perhaps 200 yards, but well within the Springfield's effective range. Within the range of the man once called Widowmaker. Tom watched as Hardin dismounted at the canyon's rim, securing his horse to a juniper, before beginning the descent on foot. A prudent choice, the trail was too dangerous for a mounted approach in darkness. Hardin moved with the cautious confidence of a man accustomed to difficult terrain, testing each step before committing his weight. Through the sight, Tom could make out the tracker's familiar duster, the broad-brimmed hat pulled low, the rifle slung across his back. Hardin paused at the first switchback, surveying the canyon floor below, with the practiced eye of a man who understood ambush. Tom's finger rested lightly on the trigger. One gentle squeeze, and Hardin would trouble them no more. One shot clean, quick, certain. But Tom McGrady hadn't survived the war and its aftermath by acting on impulse. Hardin was alone, as Cheyenne had said. If his intention was betrayal, why come without Sterling's men? If tracking them to this place was merely a prelude to an attack, why approach with such careful deliberation, making no effort to conceal his presence from those who knew the land? No, better to wait, to know. Tom eased his finger from the trigger and silently repositioned himself, trading the high vantage for a spot nearer the trail's bottom. As Hardin descended the final switchback, Tom stepped from the shadows, Springfield raised but not yet aimed. Far enough, Hardin. The tracker froze hands carefully away from his weapons. McGrady. He made no sudden movements, well aware of the rifle trained in his direction. Figured you'd be waiting. Man in your position ought to expect a bullet, not a greeting. Hardin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Man in my position expects whatever's coming. Been expecting it a long time. Sterling send you, in a manner of speaking. Hardin remained motionless, voice level. He thinks I'm tracking you, which I am. To what end? That depends on you. Hardin nodded toward the lower canyon. And the others you're protecting. Tom's grip tightened on the rifle. How many men with you? Just me. Sterling and his crew are still at your ranch, tearing the place apart, looking for something. Hardin paused. They found your maps. The news settled like a stone in Tom's gut. The Spanish surveys weren't definitive, but they'd give Sterling enough information to know he was on the right track. Why are you here, Hardin? Tom demanded. Truth now, or we end this conversation permanent-like. For a long moment, Hardin was silent, as if weighing his words or his chances. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its careful neutrality. Sterling's not what he appears. Man hired me to track his sister-in-law, claimed she was unstable, dangerous to herself, needed family intervention. Hardin's gaze was steady even down the barrel of Tom's rifle. Seen enough of life to know when a man's lying. Sterling's eyes are wrong. Wrong how? Like a snake's, dead, calculating. Hardin shook his head slightly. Didn't think much of it at first. Job's a job. But then I saw how he operated. Men disappearing who wouldn't sell their land. Convenient accidents. Threats. Why keep working for him? Needed to understand what he was really after. Hardin gestured toward the canyon depths. Now I know. It's not just about railroads or even water rights. It's about power. Absolute power over who lives and dies in this territory. Tom studied him carefully, looking for any sign of deception. You expect me to believe you've developed a conscience. Believe what you want. Hardin's shoulders straightened slightly. But I was at Shiloh too, McGrady. Different sides, same mud. Saw things no man should see. Did things no man should do. That changes a person. The words struck a chord Tom wasn't expecting. He'd heard rumors that Hardin had fought for the Confederacy before becoming scout for the Union in the war's latter years. A man with a complicated relationship to loyalty. Sterling plans to dam the main water source. Hardin continued when Tom didn't respond. Control the flow to the entire region. In this drought, that's a death sentence for anyone who crosses him. How many men does he have? 11 counting Fisher and Daltrey, all experienced, all paid well enough not to ask questions. Tom considered this information, weighing it against the risk of trusting a man who made his living hunting others. And why should I believe you're not leading them straight to us? Because I could have. Hardin's answer was simple. Could have brought Sterling's whole crew down on you at the ranch if that was my aim. Instead, I warned you. It was true enough. If betrayal had been Hardin's intention, there had been easier opportunities than this. What do you want, Hardin? The tracker's expression remained unreadable in the moonlight. Same as you, I expect. To sleep at night. To look in a mirror without seeing a monster. He paused. Sterling plans to move on the water source tomorrow. He has engineers coming from Austin to begin work immediately. This new information changed the calculation. If Sterling had already sent for engineers, he must be confident of securing the site, which meant he wouldn't leave witnesses. They'll kill anyone who knows about the water, Tom realized aloud. Starting with Mrs. Thornton, Hardin confirmed. Then you, Jenkins. Anyone who can't be bought or frightened into silence. Tom lowered the rifle, slightly decision made. Come on then, others need to hear this. Hardin remained where he stood. Rather not walk into an Apache's dwelling with you behind me, holding a rifle, if it's all the same. Despite everything, Tom felt his mouth quirk in the ghost of a smile. Prudent man. Cautious, Hardin corrected. Lived this long by staying that way. Tom considered a moment, then slowly lowered the Springfield. I won't shoot you in the back, Hardin. Not unless you give me reason. Fair enough. Hardin finally moved, descending the last few steps of the trail. Though I reckon your Apache friend might have his own notions about hospitality. Cheyenne makes his own judgments. Tom acknowledged, falling into step beside the tracker. Best hope they're in your favor. Bah. Victoria had been pacing the confines of Cheyenne's dwelling for what felt like hours when the blanket covering the doorway shifted. She whirled, heart leaping to her throat, hand moving instinctively to the small derringer Jenkins had insisted she carry. Tom ducked through the entrance, followed by Cole Hardin. Victoria's momentary relief at seeing Tom alive quickly gave way to alarm at the tracker's presence. What's he doing here? She demanded, the derringer now drawn and pointed squarely at Hardin. Lower your weapon, Mrs. Thornton, Tom said calmly. Mr. Hardin has information we need to hear. Jenkins had risen at their entrance, his own revolver half drawn. Tom, you sure about this? As sure as I can be. Tom glanced around. Where's Cheyenne? Went to secure the horses, Jenkins replied, still eyeing Hardin warily. Said something about reading the night wind. Hardin remained just inside the entrance, hands carefully visible, making no sudden movements. His gaze took in the dwelling's interior with professional assessment before settling on Victoria. Mrs. Thornton, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Been tracking you a long time. So I gathered, Victoria replied coldly, lowering the derringer but keeping it in hand. Was it worth the blood money? Never took a job to harm a woman, Hardin said, a flash of something like offense crossing his features. Sterling hired me to find you, not kill you. A meaningless distinction when the outcome would be the same. Before Hardin could respond, the blanket covering the doorway room, Chiha mai nisanin, Dway moved again and Cheyenne entered. The old Apache paused, dark eyes fixing on Hardin with an intensity that made the room seem suddenly smaller, more charged. The ghost walker, Cheyenne said, using a term Victoria didn't recognize. You carry many shadows, tracker. Hardin met the old man's gaze steadily. Don't we all, grandfather? Something passed between them, an assessment, perhaps, or a recognition. After a long moment, Cheyenne moved to the fire and seated himself. He may speak, the Apache declared. Truth or lies, his words will reveal him. Tom gestured for Hardin to join them by the fire. With careful movements, the tracker removed his hat and took a seat, keeping his distance from the others as a gesture of respect or caution. Sterling found the maps at your ranch, Hardin began without preamble. He knows the main water source is located on your property, though not its exact position. How long before they start searching the land? Tom asked. Already have scouts out, but they're looking in the wrong places. The old Spanish surveys show the access point near the dry creek bed. Hardin glanced at Cheyenne. I'm guessing that's deliberate misinformation. The old Apache's expression revealed nothing, but Tom nodded. Father moved the well after Cheyenne showed him the true source. Built a false shaft where the maps indicated to mislead anyone who came looking. Smart, Hardin acknowledged, but it won't fool Sterling for long, especially with engineers arriving tomorrow. Victoria leaned forward. Engineers? From Austin. Sterling telegraphed for them yesterday. Plans to dam the main source, create a controlled system he can regulate. Hardin's expression darkened. In a drought like this, that's a death sentence for anyone who won't pay his price. Jenkins stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Sterling's moving fast. Too fast for legal proceedings. That means he's planning to establish possession first, fight any challenges in court later. By which time anyone opposing him will have either died of thirst or been forced to accept his terms, Victoria concluded bitterly. It's exactly what Charles discovered. Marcus isn't building a railroad, he's creating a water empire. Cheyenne had remained silent, listening intently. Now he spoke, voice resonant in the firelit space. The water has flowed free for 10,000 years. To dam it would be to dam the blood of the earth itself. There's more, Hardin continued. Sterling doesn't plan to leave witnesses. Anyone who knows about the water system is a threat. Starting with me, Victoria said quietly. Hardin nodded. You're first on his list, then McGrady, the sheriff, anyone who can't be bought or frightened into silence. A heavy silence fell over the group. Tom moved to the dwelling's entrance, looking out at the night sky, where the quarter moon now hung high overhead. Dawn's about 4 hours away, he observed. Sterling will start searching in earnest once it's light. We need to warn people, Jenkins said. Frank Whitaker, the Andersons, others, whose land sits above the waterway. No time, Tom replied, turning back to face them. Sterling's men will have the trails watched. Anyone trying to spread warnings won't get far. Victoria felt the walls of their situation closing in. Then what do? We can't fight 11 armed men. Not directly, Tom agreed, but we have advantages they don't. Such as, Hardin asked, knowledge of the land, the element of surprise. Tom's gaze shifted to Cheyenne, and secrets they don't suspect. The old Apache rose, moving to the rear of the dwelling where he retrieved what appeared to be a hide-wrapped bundle. The time has come then, he said, more statement than question. Tom nodded once. I believe it has. Cheyenne unwrapped the bundle, revealing objects that caught the firelight with dull gleams. Old weapons, Victoria realized. A cavalry saber with a tarnished brass hilt. A Colt Navy revolver that appeared well-maintained despite its age. And strangest of all, a bow made from some dark wood Victoria didn't recognize, along with a quiver of arrows fletched with hawk feathers. The rifle is a white man's weapon, Cheyenne explained, noting Victoria's questioning look. It speaks too loudly. The bow whispers, and in darkness, whispers carry farther than shouts. You can't be serious, Victoria protested. Bows against revolvers, we'd be slaughtered. Not if we control when and where the fight happens, Tom countered. He turned to Hardin. You know Sterling's plans. Where will they focus their search? Hardin considered. The maps show the main water source near the dry creek bed that runs along the eastern boundary of your property. That's where they'll concentrate first. And the men, how will they deploy? Sterling's not a military man. He'll spread them too thin, trying to cover maximum ground. Hardin sketched a rough map in the dirt beside the fire. Two-man teams, most likely. Fisher and Daltrey will stay with Sterling at the command post they've established at your ranch house. Tom studied the impromptu map mind, working through possibilities. 5 teams of 2, plus Sterling and his lieutenants at the ranch. We can work with that. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Work with it, Tom. Even divided, they outnumber us severely, and they're all armed professionals. Numbers aren't everything, Mrs. Thornton. Tom's expression was grim, but determined. In the war, I learned that men who believe themselves hunters can quickly become prey when the situation's reversed. Jenkins nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his weathered features. Guerrilla tactics, hit and fade, make them jumpy, force them to make mistakes. Precisely. Tom turned to Cheyenne. We'll need every advantage the land can provide. The old Apache considered this, then nodded once. The canyon knows many paths, hidden ways that no white man has walked. He glanced at Hardin. Almost no white man. Hardin accepted the qualification with a slight inclination of his head. I can lead Sterling's men away from the true water source, feed them false information about what I've discovered. Risky, Tom observed. If they suspect you've turned, I've survived this long, Hardin replied simply. Victoria watched the exchange with growing understanding. These men, so different in background and experience, were forming a plan built on a shared language of survival and combat. For the first time since Charles' death, she felt a flicker of hope beneath her fear. What about me? She asked. I won't be left behind while you risk your lives. Tom's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Thornton, Victoria, she interrupted. If we're planning battle strategy together, I think we're beyond formalities, Mr. McGrady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Tom, then. He considered her question seriously. Can you shoot that Derringer? Charles insisted I learn. I'm proficient, if not expert. Good, because I have a particular role in mind for you, perhaps the most important one. Victoria straightened. I'm listening. Sterling wants 2 things you silenced: in control of the water source. Tom's pale blue eyes held hers steadily. What if we use one to prevent the other? Understanding dawned. You want to use me as bait. I want to use Sterling's obsession with finding you to lead him exactly where we want him, Tom corrected. Away from the true water source into a position where we control the encounter. It was a dangerous gambit, but Victoria recognized its strategic value. Where? Tom glanced at Cheyenne, who had been listening silently. The old Apache nodded once and moved to the dirt map, adding a new mark. The false shaft, Cheyenne said, the one Thomas's father built to mislead those who sought the water. It sits above a chamber filled with shifting sand. In the old days, my people used such places to trap enemies. Hardin studied the mark with professional interest. A deadfall trap. Effective if you can lure them into it. With the right bait, they'll come, Tom said, his gaze returning to Victoria. but only if you're willing. Victoria considered the plan taking shape before her weighing its risks against the certainty of what awaited if Sterling succeeded. Her husband had died trying to expose this conspiracy. How could she do any less? "I'm willing," she said firmly, "but I won't be helpless in this. I want to fight." Tom studied her for a long moment, seeing beyond the refined exterior to the steel beneath. Finally, he nodded. "Then we'd best make our preparations. Dawn comes quickly, and with it, our only chance." Outside, the quarter moon began its descent toward the western horizon, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a landscape transformed not by rain, but by the intentions of those who walked upon it. The water had flowed free for 10,000 years. Whether it would continue to do so would be decided before the next sunset. Dawn broke across the Texas panhandle in streaks of crimson and gold, illuminating a landscape transformed not by the rain it desperately needed, but by the men who moved across its parched surface with purpose. From his vantage point on the ridge overlooking what remained of Broken Creek Ranch, Tom McGrady studied the scene below through his father's old brass spyglass. The sight made his jaw tighten despite his preparation for it. The cabin where he'd been born, where his mother had died, where he'd spent 40 years of solitude, now stood as a charred skeleton against the morning sky. The barn had fared no better. Only the stone well house remained largely intact, a fact that Tom found grimly appropriate given what lay beneath it. "They're moving out," he noted quietly to Jenkins, who lay beside him on the ridge, just as Hardin said they would. The sheriff squinted toward the ruins. "I count 8 men plus Sterling. Where are the others?" "Already in position, most likely." Tom collapsed the spyglass and slid backward from the ridge to avoid being silhouetted against the lightning sky. 2-man teams spread across the eastern property line. Jenkins followed suit, the movement clearly painful for his aging joints. "Think Hardin will play his part." "He'll do what benefits Cole Hardin," Tom replied evenly. "For now, that aligns with our interests." They retreated to where their horses waited, concealed in a stand of stunted juniper. Victoria stood with them, her face resolute despite the dark circles beneath her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. She'd changed into clothing, better suited for their purpose, a split riding skirt borrowed from Cheyenne's stores left behind. He'd explained cryptically by "another who sought refuge," in a man's cotton shirt beneath Jenkins's duster. With her hair pulled back and a wide-brimmed hat shadowing her features, she might pass for a young rancher at a distance. "They burned it all," Tom informed her, his voice carefully neutral. "Moving out now to search the eastern section." Victoria studied his face, reading the controlled emotion beneath his stoic expression. "I'm sorry about your home, Tom." He shrugged, the gesture belying the hollow feeling in his chest. "Just wood and nails. Land's what matters." He checked the Springfield's action, the familiar motion centering him. "Everyone clear on their positions." Jenkins nodded. "Cheyenne's already in place at the false shaft. Said he'd prepare the ground, whatever that means." "It means," Tom replied, "that Sterling's men are in for some surprises." He turned to Victoria. "Last chance to reconsider your role. No shame in seeking safer ground." Victoria checked the derringer tucked into her belt, then met his gaze steadily. "My husband died for exposing this conspiracy. I'll see it through to the end." Tom studied her a moment longer, a newfound respect evident in his expression. "Very well, time to move then. Remember, we're not looking for a stand-up fight. Hit and fade, keep them off balance, drive them toward the false shaft." "And if things go wrong," Jenkins asked. "Retreat to Cheyenne's Canyon. It's defensible with minimal numbers." Tom mounted his buckskin with practiced ease. "But I don't intend for things to go wrong." Victoria allowed herself a small smile as she swung into her own saddle. Has anything in this affair gone according to intention so far? Despite everything, Tom found himself returning the smile, a brief flicker that softened his weathered features. "Fair point, Mrs. Victoria. Let's hope our luck changes." With that, they separated, each riding toward their designated positions in what had become an improvised battlefield. As Tom guided General toward the western boundary of his property, he found himself reflecting on the strange turns that had brought him to this moment, from solitary rancher to reluctant warrior in the span of mere days. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years trying to forget what the war had taught him about killing, only to find those same skills might now be the only thing standing between innocent people and a tyrant's ambition. "Some fights choose you," he'd told Victoria. The land had taught him that much. Bam! Marcus Sterling considered himself a civilized man. He appreciated fine wines, European art, and the elegant efficiency of modern business practices. Violence, while occasionally necessary, was best delegated to those with the appropriate temperament and skills, men like Fisher and Daltrey, who understood that bloodshed was simply another transaction in a complex marketplace. Now standing amid the smoldering ruins of McGrady's pathetic excuse for a ranch house, Sterling found himself experiencing an uncharacteristic desire to personally witness the rancher's demise. It was most unseemly, this visceral reaction, but there it was, a testament to how thoroughly McGrady had disrupted his carefully orchestrated plans. Still no sign of the main shaft, Fisher reported, approaching from the collapsed barn. The gunman's usual immaculate appearance had suffered from the night's activities, trail dust and soot marring his dark clothing. Men have checked every structure on the property. Sterling removed a handkerchief from his breast pocket, wiping a spot of ash from his otherwise pristine riding boots. The Spanish surveys were quite specific, Mr. Fisher. The access point is here somewhere on this miserable patch of dirt. Maps could be wrong, Fisher suggested, or McGrady's father might have concealed it. A distinct possibility. Sterling folded the handkerchief with precise movements, which is why Mr. McGrady's cooperation would be so valuable. A pity he's chosen to be difficult. Fisher's expression remained impassive, but his hand rested casually near his holstered revolver, a man comfortable with the tools of his trade. Hardin's our best chance of finding them. If anyone can track McGrady through this wasteland, it's him. Indeed, Sterling's tone carried a note of skepticism. Though I find it curious our esteemed tracker has yet to report back this morning. Hardin works his own way, Fisher defended. Man's never failed to deliver. Until now, perhaps. Sterling turned, surveying the property with cold calculation. No matter, we have engineers arriving from Austin by noon. With or without McGrady's cooperation, we will locate the main shaft and begin construction immediately. And the woman, Victoria Thornton. Sterling's expression hardened, something reptilian briefly visible beneath his cultivated exterior. My sister-in-law has become a liability I can no longer afford. When found, she is to be dealt with permanently, as are any witnesses to her unfortunate accident. Fisher nodded once, no moral qualms evident in his weathered features. Understood. Excellent. Sterling checked his pocket watch, a gold timepiece that had once belonged to Charles before his suicide. Send the search teams farther east along the dry creek bed. According to the surveys, that's our most promising location. As Fisher moved to relay the orders, Sterling remained by the charred remnants of the cabin, contemplating the next phase of his grand design. By week's end, he would control the most precious resource in the territory. Within a month, the Western Frontier Railroad would announce an unprecedented expansion, bringing civilization to the Texas Panhandle, along with water rights controlled exclusively by Sterling Holdings Limited. Those who cooperated would prosper. Those who resisted would wither, quite literally, on the vine. It was simply business after all, the inevitable march of progress. A commotion from the eastern perimeter interrupted his musings. One of the search teams was returning at a gallop, dust rising behind their mounts. Sterling straightened, irritation flickering across his features at the unseemly haste. Mr. Sterling, the lead rider called, reining in sharply. Hardin's found something. Says it's urgent. You come yourself. Has he indeed? Sterling's skepticism remained, but curiosity overrode it. What exactly has our tracker discovered? Don't know, sir, but he sent this. The rider extended a folded paper. Sterling opened it, recognizing Hardin's sparse handwriting. Found shaft and woman. Eastern Ridge old survey marker. Come alone, she's skittish. Mention of documents implicating you. A slow smile spread across Sterling's features. How fortuitous. It seems Mrs. Thornton has made our task considerably easier. He turned to Fisher. Gather 4 men. We're joining Mr. Hardin immediately. He says come alone, Fisher pointed out. Indeed he does. Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. And we shall respect his request to a point. You and the others will maintain a discreet distance until I determine the situation. Fisher nodded, understanding the implication. If Hardin had turned an unlikely but not impossible scenario, they would be prepared to respond accordingly. As Sterling mounted his black stallion, anticipation replaced his earlier irritation. By midday, the last obstacles to his vision would be eliminated. Victoria with whatever documents she imagined would save her. McGrady with his stubborn attachment to worthless land. All swept aside by the inevitable tide of progress. Some men shaped history. Others were simply washed away by it. Marcus Sterling had every intention of being among the former. Dippin'. Victoria positioned herself exactly as planned. Visible on the ridge beside the false shaft, a solitary figure gazing out over the drought-stricken landscape. The rising sun cast her shadow long against the rocky ground, a dark extension reaching toward the east, where Sterling's men would approach. Behind her, the weathered wooden structure of the false well house rose from the rocky soil, a simple frame building that concealed what appeared to be an ordinary ranch well. Only those who knew its secrets would recognize the dangers it contained. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Victoria kept her posture straight, channeling the poise that had served her through Boston's most cutthroat social engagements. This performance required every bit of composure she could muster. Lives depended on it, not just her own, but those of the people who had risked everything to help her. Tom's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Use her as visible bait to draw Sterling to the false shaft where Cheyenne had prepared what the old Apache called a spirit trap. Jenkins was positioned a quarter-mile south, ready to intercept any flanking approach. Tom himself had taken the most dangerous position concealed among the rocks above the ridge, with his Springfield close enough to intervene but holding his fire until absolutely necessary. A man reveals his true nature when he believes victory is in his grasp, Cheyenne had observed during their planning. The old medicine man was now hidden somewhere near the false shaft, though Victoria couldn't have said where. The Apache moved like a shadow, appearing and disappearing with an uncanny ability that defied his advanced years. Movement in the distance caught her attention, riders approaching from the direction of the ranch house. Victoria steeled herself, adjusting her stance to ensure her silhouette was unmistakable against the morning sky. Behind her lay Charles' leather portfolio, empty of the damning documents it supposedly contained, but Sterling wouldn't know that until he was close enough to spring the trap. She allowed herself one glance toward the rocky outcropping, where Tom waited, invisible to her eyes but present nonetheless. His final words before they'd separated echoed in her mind. Trust the land. It's been here longer than any of us, and it has its own ways of dispensing justice. The approaching riders resolved into distinct figures, Sterling in the lead on his black stallion, followed at a discreet distance by Cole Hardin. The tracker had played his part perfectly, discovering her location and reporting it to Sterling while subtly encouraging him to come personally rather than send his men. Victoria took a deep breath, positioning herself beside the false shaft. The first and most dangerous phase of their plan was in motion. Now came the delicate task of holding Sterling's attention long enough for the trap to be sprung. With someone. From his position among the ridge rocks, Tom observed Sterling's approach with the cold detachment he'd cultivated during the war. Through the Springfield sight, he could make out the railroad man's features clearly, the confident set of his jaw, the calculating eyes, the posture of a man accustomed to getting his way. Hardin rode several paces behind, playing his role convincingly. The tracker's expression betrayed nothing, but Tom noted the subtle way he scanned the surroundings, alert for signs of the ambush he himself had helped orchestrate. Movement to the east caught Tom's attention. Fisher and 3 gunmen approaching in a wide arc meant to flank the ridge. They maintained enough distance to remain outside normal rifle range, a sensible precaution, but ineffective against a marksman of Tom's caliber. The Springfield could reach them if necessary. Tom shifted his aim back to Sterling, who had reined in his mount about 50 yards from where Victoria stood. Close enough to speak but not to see the nature of the documents she held. Mrs. Thornton, Sterling's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. What a pleasant surprise. I've been quite concerned for your welfare. Victoria's response was too low for Tom to hear, but her posture remained defiant. She gestured toward the leather portfolio, then toward the false shaft beside her. Sterling's body language shifted subtly, interest, replacing caution. The bait was working. Tom adjusted his position slightly, keeping the rifle trained on Sterling, while monitoring Fisher's flanking movement. The timing would be critical. If Sterling dismounted to approach Victoria, they would spring the trap. If Fisher's men closed within effective firing range, Tom would be forced to act sooner. A flicker of movement near the false shaft indicated Cheyenne was in position. The old Apache had spent hours the previous night preparing the ground-weakening supports and creating what he called a doorway to the underworld. Tom didn't fully understand the preparations, trusting Cheyenne's ancient knowledge of the land and its secrets. Sterling urged his mount forward, closing the distance between himself and Victoria. He spoke again, gesturing expansively, the practiced charm of a businessman making an offer. Victoria shook her head, clutching the portfolio closer. Her performance was flawless, projecting exactly the right mixture of determination and fear. Tom's finger rested lightly against the Springfield's trigger. Through the sight, he could place a bullet precisely through Sterling's head at this distance. One shot, and the immediate threat would end. But that wasn't the plan. Sterling was merely the most visible part of a larger conspiracy. The engineers from Austin, the investors in Chicago, the corrupt officials who had facilitated his land grabs killing Sterling might delay the scheme but wouldn't end it. They needed him alive with witnesses to his crimes. Sterling dismounted, approaching Victoria with the confident stride of a man who believed victory was within grasp. Exactly as Cheyenne had predicted. Tom shifted his aim to Fisher, who had signaled his men to spread out along the eastern approach. The gunman was more dangerous now than Sterling, a professional who would recognize the signs of an ambush if given time to study the situation. Through the sight, Tom saw Fisher freeze suddenly, hand raised to halt his men. The gunman's experienced eye had caught something, a reflection, perhaps, or a shadow where none should be. He turned in Tom's direction, scanning the ridge with newfound suspicion. Time had just run out. Tom exhaled slowly, centered his aim, and squeezed the trigger. Listen, Victoria had never considered herself particularly brave. Determined, yes. Resourceful when necessary. But bravery, the kind that faced mortal danger without flinching, had never been tested in her sheltered Boston life. Until now. As Sterling approached, his cultured voice carried the same false concern she'd heard at Charles' funeral. My dear Victoria, this charade has gone on quite long enough. You're clearly unwell. Grief can affect the strongest minds. Whatever you believe you've discovered, I assure you there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. She stood her ground, forcing herself to maintain eye contact with the man who had orchestrated her husband's murder. The only explanation, Marcus, is your greed. Charles discovered what you were really planning with the Western Frontier investments. This land isn't for railroads, it's for controlling water. Sterling's expression shifted subtly, the mask of concern slipping to reveal something colder beneath. Charles always did have an unfortunate tendency to misinterpret business opportunities, a flaw you seem to have inherited. These documents suggest otherwise. Victoria clutched the empty portfolio. Copies of the original surveys, records of bribes to land officials. Charles kept meticulous notes. Interest sharpened Sterling's gaze. Did he indeed? How enterprising of my late brother. He extended a hand. Perhaps you'd allow me to examine these allegations. I'm sure we can clear up any misunderstanding. Victoria took a calculated step backward, closer to the false shaft. The misunderstanding, Marcus, was mine, believing you capable of basic human decency. Charles trusted you. My mistake was not realizing the depths of your betrayal until it was too late. Sterling's charm evaporated entirely, replaced by the cold efficiency that had built his empire. A touching sentiment, but ultimately irrelevant. Those documents, Victoria, now, after which we can discuss your future prospects. The threat behind his words was unmistakable. Victoria took another step back, positioning herself precisely where Cheyenne had instructed, at the edge of what the Apache had called the spirit's doorway. You'll have to take them from me, Marcus. She held the portfolio against her chest. And explain to these witnesses why you're assaulting your brother's widow. Sterling's eyes narrowed. Witnesses? I see no one but that traitor Hardin, whose testimony would hardly... The crack of a rifle shot interrupted him. Sterling whirled toward the sound as pandemonium erupted along the eastern approach. One of his men tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. More shots followed in quick succession, not from Tom's position, but from the south where Jenkins had been stationed. In the confusion, Victoria executed the most dangerous part of their plan. She tossed the portfolio directly at Sterling's feet, then flung herself sideways away from the false shaft, rolling behind a boulder as Cheyenne had shown her. Sterling lunged for the portfolio and the earth opened beneath him. One moment he stood on solid ground. The next he was waist-deep in collapsing soil, the false shaft's outer structure splintering around him as hidden supports gave way. His shout of surprise turned to genuine alarm as he continued to sink the dry soil, behaving like quicksand, drawing him inexorably downward. Victoria, he shouted, genuine fear replacing his earlier confidence. Help me! She remained behind the boulder, heart hammering as gunfire continued to echo across the ridge. Tom's plan was working. Fisher and his men were pinned down by fire from multiple directions, unable to approach the shaft to assist Sterling. Hardin had disappeared during the initial confusion, circling around Victoria, hoped to support Jenkins from the flank as they'd arranged. If not, they had miscalculated badly. Sterling was chest-deep now, the portfolio forgotten as he struggled against the collapsing earth. For God's sake, woman, I'll drown in this. It's not water, Marcus, Victoria called from behind her cover. Just dry soil. The waters elsewhere, as you well know. The Apache call this a spirit trap, fitting for a man who tried to steal their sacred springs. Terror replaced calculation in Sterling's eyes as the reality of his situation became clear. He wasn't facing a quick death by bullet, but a slow, suffocating one as the earth reclaimed him. "I'll pay you," he shouted, desperation stripping away his cultivated facade. "Name your price. The railroad shares the Boston properties, all of it." Victoria remained where she was, torn between the justice of the moment and her own instinctive humanity. Sterling deserved this fate, had earned it through murder, conspiracy, and a callous disregard for countless lives his water scheme would have destroyed. And yet, watching a man sink towards certain death, hearing his increasingly frantic pleas, it awakened something in Victoria that transcended justice. Something Charles, for all his flaws, would have recognized and respected. "Damn you, Marcus," she whispered, then called out, "Stop struggling. It only makes you sink faster." She emerged from behind the boulder, keeping low as gunfire continued to echo across the ridge. Sterling was shoulders deep now, genuine terror replacing calculation in his eyes. "I can't pull you out alone," Victoria said, approaching cautiously, "but I can keep you from sinking further until help arrives." "What help?" Sterling gasped, fighting to keep his chin above the collapsing soil. "Your rancher friend is occupied, in case you haven't noticed." As if in answer, a shadow fell across them. Victoria looked up to see Tom standing at the edge of the collapsed Springfield in hand, his expression unreadable as he surveyed Sterling's predicament. "Seems you've found yourself in a bind, Mr. Sterling," he observed, voice neutral, despite the gun battle still raging behind them. "McGrady." Sterling's tone shifted instantly to negotiation. "Be reasonable. This land, the water rights, I can make you a wealthy man. Partners 50-50. Tom's expression didn't change. "Not interested in wealth, Mr. Sterling. Just what's rightfully mine." He turned to Victoria. "You all right?" She nodded, suddenly aware of how she must appear, covered in dust hair, wild from her earlier role behind the boulder. "Yes, but we can't just let him die like this." "No," Tom agreed, "we can't." He knelt, extending the Springfield's barrel towards Sterling. "Grab hold, slowly." Relief flooded Sterling's features as he grasped the rifle barrel. Tom braced himself, nodding to Victoria to help stabilize his position. Together they began the laborious process of extracting Sterling from what would have been his grave. The gunfire had diminished, suggesting Jenkins and Hardin were gaining the upper hand against Fisher's men. Victoria allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. Perhaps their audacious plan was working after all. As Sterling's upper body emerged from the collapsing pit, his expression shifted once more, relief giving way to calculation. His right hand still clutched the rifle barrel, but his left moved toward his waistcoat, where Victoria knew he carried a derringer similar to her own. "Tom!" she cried in warning, reaching for her own weapon. Tom reacted with the speed of a man who'd survived war and its aftermath. He jerked the Springfield upward, unbalancing Sterling and sending him sprawling half in half out of the pit. The hidden derringer clattered to the ground between them. Sterling lunged for it, desperation lending him speed, but Tom was faster. His boot came down on Sterling's wrist with a crack that made Victoria wince, pinning the railroad man at the edge of the collapse. That, Tom said quietly, was unwise. Sterling's face contorted with pain and fury. "You're dead, McGrady. Both of you. When Fisher and the others—" "Your men have surrendered," came Jenkins' voice from behind them. The sheriff approached, revolver drawn, blood staining his left sleeve, but his expression grimly satisfied. Hardin convinced them it was the sensible choice given the circumstances. As if summoned by his name, the tracker appeared leading his dun Mustang. Two of Sterling's men followed on foot, hands raised, Fisher among them. The gunman's expression was resigned, a professional, recognizing when the odds had turned decisively against him. "Found something you might be interested in, McGrady," Hardin announced, tossing a leather satchel toward Tom. Sterling's man Daltrey was carrying it. "Seems to contain some rather incriminating correspondence about water rights in railroad land acquisitions." Tom caught the satchel one-handed, his other still keeping the Springfield trained on Sterling. Actual documents, not empty portfolios. Convenient. Victoria couldn't suppress a smile at the irony. The empty portfolio had been bait. Now they had the real evidence they needed. Sterling's expression cycled through rage, calculation, and finally a cold composure that was perhaps more frightening than his earlier fury. "This changes nothing," he said flatly. "I have connections your provincial minds can't begin to comprehend. Judges, governors, senators, all with investments in Western frontier." "Maybe so," Jenkins acknowledged, "but they tend to distance themselves from murder and attempted murder. especially when witnessed by a county sheriff. He gestured to Hardin, and a respected scout with connections to the U.S. Marshal's office. This last revelation visibly startled Sterling. "You're working for the Marshals? Impossible. Your reputation is exactly what I needed it to be," Hardin interrupted. "Been tracking Western Frontier's operations for 6 months. Your brother-in-law wasn't the only one who noticed discrepancies in the company's land acquisitions." Victoria stared at the tracker pieces falling into place. "You weren't working for Marcus at all." "Not exclusively," Hardin corrected. "Taking his money while gathering evidence was efficient." A hint of a smile touched his weathered features. "Though I admit I didn't anticipate you leading me straight to the source, Mrs. Thornton." Tom's expression suggested he wasn't entirely surprised by this revelation. "You might have mentioned your true affiliation earlier." "Wouldn't have been believed," Hardin replied pragmatically. "And plans have a way of working out better when people act naturally." Jenkins holstered his revolver with a wince, his wounded arm clearly causing him pain. "What matters is we have Sterling, his men, and documentation of the conspiracy, enough to ensure this water scheme dies here." Sterling, still pinned at the edge of the collapse, managed a cold laugh. "You simple fools, the drought continues, the need for controlled water access remains. If not me, someone else will implement the same plan, someone with the vision to see beyond your outdated sentimentality about free-flowing water." "Perhaps," Tom acknowledged, finally removing his boot from Sterling's wrist, "but they'll have to do it without the Apache waterway." Cheyenne. From the rocks nearby, the old medicine man appeared silent as a shadow. He carried a clay vessel decorated with symbols Victoria didn't recognize. "The spirits have heard," Cheyenne announced. "The false door is open. Now we seal the true one until those worthy of its gifts return." Sterling's expression twisted with confusion and mounting alarm. "What nonsense is this? The water source will remain hidden," Tom finished, "until the rains return and the land heals. Cheyenne's people protected it for 1,000 years. They can protect it a while longer." As if in response to his words, a low rumble emanated from beneath them. The ground trembled slightly, and from the direction of Broken Creek Ranch came the sound of rushing water. Not on the surface, but beneath it, a subterranean torrent changing course. "What have you done?" Sterling demanded, genuine fear replacing his earlier composure. Cheyenne approached the edge of the collapsed shaft, uncorking the clay vessel. "The mother pool returns to sleep," he said, simply pouring a liquid that seemed to shimmer with more than just the morning sunlight. Where it touched the earth, the ground hissed and settled, the collapsing pit stabilizing around Sterling's half-buried form. "The water finds new channels," the old Apache continued, "deeper paths that no map shows. It will return when the people remember its true value, life, not profit." Victoria watched in awe as the liquid from the vessel sank into the ground, disappearing completely. The rumbling beneath them gradually subsided, leaving only the ordinary sounds of the Texas morning wind through scrub brush, a distant hawk's cry, the shifting of horses. "It's done," Cheyenne announced, recorking the empty vessel. "The spirit water sleeps." Sterling's face had lost its calculated mask, entirely naked disbelief replacing it. "Superstitious nonsense," he managed, though his voice lacked conviction. "The aquifer can't simply disappear." "Not disappeared," Tom corrected. "Change course." The Apache had been guiding the water's path for centuries. Cheyenne's people built the system so it could be redirected if threatened. He gazed toward his distant ranch where dust still rose from the shifting earth. "My father's well will run dry now, along with the others you sought to control, at least until the rains return." The full implications seemed to dawn on Sterling all at once. His scheme, built on controlling access to an irreplaceable resource, had just watched that resource vanish beyond his reach. The empire he'd envisioned, the power he'd nearly grasped, all turned to dust as surely as the drought-stricken land beneath them. For the first time since Victoria had known him, Marcus Sterling appeared truly defeated. Tom turned to Jenkins. "Sheriff, I believe you have some prisoners to transport." Jenkins nodded, gesturing for Hardin to help him secure the captives. "Federal marshals will want to question Sterling personally, the others too." As they worked to extract Sterling from his half-buried position, Victoria moved to stand beside Tom. Together they gazed across the drought-stricken landscape that had nearly become the centerpiece of a water empire. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Without the underground springs, won't the drought's effects be even worse?" Tom's expression remained steady, his pale eyes reflecting the morning sky. "Cheyenne says the water hasn't gone far, just beyond human interference. The shallow wells will run dry, yes. But the land has faced drought before. People will adapt until the rains return." "And if they don't?" Tom was silent for a long moment, watching as Jenkins and Hardin secured Sterling and his men for the journey to town. Finally, he turned to her, something softer in his gaze than she'd seen before. "Then we face it together," he said simply, "as people should." The words carried more meaning than their straightforward delivery suggested. Victoria felt something shift between them, a connection forged through danger and shared purpose, now evolving into something neither had anticipated when she'd collapsed at his door just days ago. Before she could respond, Cheyenne approached, his ageless eyes moving between them with knowing wisdom. "The water sleeps," the old Apache said, "but other things awaken." He nodded toward the distant horizon where clouds had begun to gather for the first time in months. "The land remembers those who protect it." As if to emphasize his words, a cool breeze swept across the ridge. Not the hot, dust-laden wind they'd grown accustomed to, but something fresher, carrying the faintest scent of moisture. Victoria lifted her face to it, allowing herself to hope for the first time since Charles' death that new beginnings were possible even in the most parched and broken places. Behind them, Sterling and his men were being led away, their dreams of empire dissolving like mirages in the Texas heat. Before them stretched a land transformed not by the water that had been hidden, but by the choices of those who had chosen to defend it. "I should return to Boston," Victoria said softly, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. "There will be legal matters to settle Charles' estate to close." Tom nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Of course, when the time comes, I'd be happy to escort you to the nearest train station." "And then," she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Tom gazed at the distant gathering clouds, considering. "Then I rebuild. Start again." His eyes returned to hers. "Unless." The word hung between them, filled with possibilities neither had dared acknowledge until now. "Unless," Victoria agreed softly, leaving the rest unspoken but understood. Above them, a hawk circled on the freshening breeze, its cry carrying across the landscape like a promise. The drought had not yet broken, the rains had not yet come, but something had changed nonetheless, a shifting as profound as the hidden water, finding new channels beneath their feet. Whatever came next, they would face it standing on solid ground. 3 months passed before the rains came to the Texas Panhandle. They arrived without warning on a hot August afternoon, dark clouds gathering on the western horizon like a cavalry assembling for charge. The first drops fell tentatively, as if testing whether the parched earth remembered their purpose. Then the skies opened, releasing a deluge that transformed dust to mud, in minutes dry creek beds, to rushing torrents within the hour. Tom McGrady stood on the half-completed porch of his new cabin, watching the miracle unfold across land that had nearly forgotten the touch of water. 3 months of back-breaking labor had raised the structure from the ashes of the old, larger, sturdier, built with an eye toward the future rather than mere shelter. The barn had been rebuilt first, a practical necessity for the surviving livestock. The well house stood reinforced with fresh stone, though the shaft itself remained dry since the day Cheyenne had redirected the underground waterways. Despite the dryness of the well, Tom's cattle had survived. Neighboring ranchers had shared what water they could spare, community bonds strengthened by their shared opposition to Sterling's schemes. Frank Whitaker had been particularly generous, allowing Tom's herd to graze on his less parched eastern pastures, while the Broken Creek Ranch slowly recovered. And now the rain. Sweet, life-giving rain that drummed against the new cedar shingles above Tom's head, raising a clean, sharp scent that mingled with the earthy perfume of wet soil. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, feeling years of tension drain from his shoulders. "It's beautiful," came a voice from the doorway behind him. Tom turned to find Victoria watching him. Her expression soft in the gray light of the storm. She wore a simple calico dress, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. The elegant Boston widow had adapted to ranch life with a determination that continually surprised and impressed him. "Never thought I'd see it again," Tom admitted, turning back to the downpour. "Not like this." Victoria stepped beside him at the porch rail, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence without touching. "Cheyenne said it would come, that the land remembers those who protect it." Tom nodded, thinking of the old Apache who had retreated to his canyon after Sterling's capture. Cheyenne had emerged occasionally in the months since bringing herbs, when Victoria fell ill with fever in June, offering cryptic but ultimately practical advice about where to rebuild the cabin. "Cheyenne says many things," Tom replied, "some clearer than others." Victoria smiled, a soft expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to something that still made Tom's chest tighten after all these months. "He said you would doubt even as you witnessed the truth of his words." Not doubting, Tom corrected, just adjusting my understanding. It was an understatement. The events of that May morning had forced Tom to reconsider many things he thought he knew about the land beneath his feet, about the intersection of the visible and invisible worlds. He'd always respected the Apache ways his father had insisted upon it, but witnessing Cheyenne redirect ancient waterways with ritual and some shimmering liquid had expanded Tom's perception of what was possible. The rain intensified sheets of water, creating a translucent curtain at the porch's edge. Lightning flashed across the distant mesas, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the new cabin. "Will it be enough?" Victoria asked, her gaze on the rain-lashed landscape. "To end the drought, I mean." Tom considered the question. "Hard to say. 3 years of dryness won't be undone by one storm, no matter how fierce. But it's a beginning." "A beginning?" She echoed, something wistful in her tone. "Those seem to be in abundance lately." The observation hung between them, laden with meaning neither had fully articulated. Victoria's temporary stay at Broken Creek had extended through weeks, then months. Her return to Boston, initially delayed by the legal proceedings against Sterling, had been postponed further by practical considerations. The difficulty of travel during the height of summer, the fever that had confined her to bed for 2 weeks, the ongoing work of rebuilding the ranch. Excuses, Tom knew. Comfortable fictions that allowed them to avoid discussing the real reason for her continued presence. "I received a telegram from Mr. Hollister yesterday," Victoria said, referring to the Boston attorney handling Charles' estate. "The final paperwork is ready for my signature. The sale of the shipping business is complete." Tom nodded, keeping his expression neutral, despite the sudden hollow feeling in his chest. "When will you leave?" "The stage runs through Gentry next Wednesday." Victoria's gaze remained on the distant horizon. "Weather permitting, I'll see you get there safely." A silence fell between them, filled only by the drumming of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. So many words unspoken, Tom thought. So many things easier to feel than to say aloud. Victoria turned to face him, her green eyes searching his face. "Is that all you have to say, Thomas McGrady?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. In their months together, they had established a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day, taking meals together, sharing stories in the evenings by lamplight. A companionship that had deepened into something more, though neither had put a name to it. Physical expressions of affection had been limited to the briefest touches, a hand steadying an elbow, fingers brushing while passing tools, shoulders pressed together while examining building plans. Once during her fever, Tom had held her hand through the worst night, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure she could hear, but nothing more. Now, with her departure looming, the careful distance they'd maintained seemed suddenly absurd. "What would you have me say?" Tom asked, his voice low. "The truth," Victoria replied simply. "Whatever that may be." The truth. Such a straightforward request, yet so difficult to fulfill. Tom turned his gaze back to the rain, gathering his thoughts. "I've lived alone most of my life," he began slowly. "Even during the war, surrounded by thousands, I kept to myself. After Mother died, I didn't speak more than a dozen words a day for years." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Then you arrived half dead in a sandstorm, and suddenly my quiet existence wasn't so quiet anymore." Victoria remained silent, giving him space to continue. "I thought I preferred solitude," Tom admitted. "Believed it was my natural state. These past months have challenged that belief." "Is that your way of saying you'd miss me if I left?" Victoria asked, a hint of gentle teasing in her tone, despite the seriousness of the conversation. Tom turned to face her fully. "It's my way of saying I don't want you to go." The simple declaration hung in the rain-washed air between them. Victoria's expression softened, something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Then ask me to stay," she said quietly. Tom hesitated, decades of solitude and self-sufficiency, warring with the unfamiliar but increasingly powerful need for this woman's presence in his life. "You have a life in Boston," he said finally. "Society, culture, conveniences. Things Broken Creek can't offer." "I had those things with Charles," Victoria countered, "along with a marriage based on social compatibility rather than deeper connection. It was adequate." Her gaze held his steadily. "I've learned I want more than adequacy in this life." "What do you want, Victoria?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Purpose, honesty, partnership." She took a step closer. "I want to build something meaningful, not just exist within structures others have created. These past months helping restore this ranch, I've felt more alive than in all my years in Boston." "It's hard work," Tom warned. "Endless challenges, The drought might return. Winters here can kill the unprepared. Victoria's mouth curved in a smile. Are you trying to frighten me away, Mr. McGrady? After I've survived Sterling's assassination attempts, a Texas sandstorm, and helping you rebuild a cabin in summer heat. Despite himself, Tom smiled in return, just making sure you understand what you'd be choosing. I understand perfectly. Victoria's expression grew serious again. The question is whether you're prepared to break the solitude you've maintained all these years, whether you can truly share this land and your life with someone else. It was the heart of the matter laid bare with characteristic directness. Tom had existed so long within the boundaries of his own company that the prospect of permanently altering that state was both exhilarating and terrifying. Before he could respond, movement at the edge of the property caught his attention. Through the curtain of rain, a rider approached on a familiar dun Mustang. Hardin, Tom observed, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the intensity of their conversation. Wonder what brings him out in this weather. Victoria followed his gaze, her expression shifting to one of concern. It must be important. They watched as Cole Hardin guided his mount through the downpour toward the cabin. The tracker looked much as he had when they'd first met, weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat duster, now slick with rain, the easy posture of a man at home in the saddle. But there were differences, too. The wariness that had characterized him during their early encounters had diminished, replaced by a more settled demeanor. Hardin reined in at the porch steps, touching his hat brim in greeting. McGrady, Mrs. Thornton, didn't mean to interrupt. Not interrupting, Tom replied, though the timing suggested otherwise. Come up out of this downpour. Hardin dismounted, securing his horse to the porch rail before joining them under the roof's shelter. Water streamed from his duster as he removed his hat, running a hand through damp hair, gone silver at the temples. Quite a storm, he observed, gazing at the sheets of rain. Seems the drought might be breaking at last. Let's hope so, Tom agreed. What brings you out in this weather? Thought you were in Austin for the Sterling trial. Hardin nodded. Just returned. That's partly why I'm here. He reached inside his duster, withdrawing a folded newspaper protected from the rain. Thought you should see this. Came on yesterday's stage. Tom accepted the paper, unfolding it to reveal the Austin Statesman's front page. The headline was unmistakable. Railroad magnate Sterling convicted water empire conspiracy ends with 20-year sentence. Victoria moved closer, reading over Tom's shoulder, her proximity sending a current of awareness through him, despite the gravity of the news. 20 years, she murmured. It hardly seems enough for what he did to Charles, to all those ranchers who lost their land. Justice has its limitations, Hardin acknowledged. But he'll never build his water empire now. The evidence was too damning, especially after Fisher turned state's witness. Tom scanned the article, noting the details of the trial and conviction. Sterling had maintained his innocence to the end, presenting himself as a visionary businessman whose methods, while perhaps aggressive, were aimed at bringing progress to the Texas territory. The jury had been unpersuaded. What about the others? Tom asked. The investors, the corrupt land officials. Some facing charges, others distancing themselves from Sterling as fast as they can. Hardin's expression was grimly satisfied. The Western Frontier Railroad is being reorganized under new ownership. They've abandoned plans for the Texas Panhandle Road entirely. Good, Tom said, simply folding the paper. Land should belong to those who work it, not speculators looking to profit from others' misfortune. Hardin nodded in agreement, then glanced between Tom and Victoria with a knowing expression that suggested he was aware of the conversation he'd interrupted. There's more news, actually, part of why I rode out in this deluge. Oh, Victoria prompted. Federal judge has ruled on Charles Thornton's estate. With Sterling convicted, the court found his claims on your husband's assets fraudulent. Hardin produced another document from inside his duster. This arrived for you at the marshal's office, Mrs. Thornton. Legal notification that all properties and investments have been restored to your control. Victoria accepted the document with visible surprise. I hadn't expected resolution so quickly. Judge Harmon has a reputation for efficiency, Hardin explained, and the evidence against Sterling was overwhelming. Tom watched as Victoria unfolded the document, her expression shifting as she read its contents. Something like relief crossed her features, followed by a more complex emotion he couldn't quite interpret. According to this, she said finally, I am now the majority shareholder in what remains of the Thornton Shipping Company, as well as several properties in Boston and Chicago. She looked up at Tom, her eyes bright with an emotion he still couldn't name. I appear to be a woman of independent means, Mr. McGrady. The significance wasn't lost on him. Victorian society placed strict limitations on widows, particularly regarding financial autonomy. With her husband's estate restored, Victoria now possessed the freedom to determine her own future without the economic pressures that constrained most women of her era, including the freedom to remain in Texas if that was her choice. Hardin, ever perceptive, glanced between them once more. "Well," he said, settling his hat back on his head, "I should continue to town before this storm worsens. Just wanted to deliver the news personally." "You're welcome to shelter here until it passes," Tom offered, though part of him hoped the tracker would decline. "Appreciate that, but I've ridden through worse." Hardin's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, suggesting he understood perfectly well what was unfolding between them. "Judge also asked me to deliver a message, Mrs. Thornton. Said you'd need to appear in person to sign the final papers, but there's no particular rush. At her convenience," were his exact words. Victoria nodded, still processing the implications of her newfound independence. "Please convey my gratitude to Judge Harmon." Hardin mounted his dun with the easy grace of a lifetime horseman. Before riding away, he paused, regarding them thoughtfully from beneath his hat brim. "Heard you're rebuilding the south pasture fence next," he remarked to Tom. "Good stretch of land there once this rain brings the grass back. Large enough for a decent-sized herd." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Victoria, then back to Tom. "Might be too much for one person to manage alone." With that observation hanging in the rain-soaked air, Hardin touched his hat brim once more and rode away, soon disappearing into the gray curtain of the downpour. Silence fell between them again, but it had changed character, charged now with possibilities that neither could ignore. "He's not subtle," Tom observed finally. Victoria laughed, the sound bright against the backdrop of falling rain. "No, but he's perceptive." She held up the legal document. "It seems my future is entirely my own to determine." "So it would appear," Tom agreed, watching her carefully. Victoria folded the paper deliberately and slipped it into her pocket. Then, with equal deliberation, she moved closer to him, close enough that he could see raindrops clinging to her eyelashes. "Ask me to stay Thomas McGrady," she said softly. "Not as a woman in need of protection or shelter, but as someone who chooses this land and you freely." The last of Tom's reservations dissolved under that steady green gaze. He reached out, taking her hand in his, a simple gesture that somehow felt more intimate than any they had shared before. "Stay," he said simply. "Build this place with me, face whatever comes, drought or flood, hardship or plenty, together." Victoria's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. "Yes," she replied, equally simple. "I will." The rain continued to fall around them, a benediction on parched earth and new beginnings alike. Tom found himself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation, a lightness in his chest, as if some long-carried burden had finally been set down. Slowly giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Victoria met him halfway, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek as their lips met in a kiss as gentle as the rain was fierce. When they parted, Tom rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, savoring the moment. "This won't be easy," he murmured, "building a life here." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Victoria replied. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the simple touch more affecting than he could have imagined. "But I've discovered I quite enjoy challenges, Mr. McGrady." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them again, causing Tom to straighten with a rueful smile. Popular day for visitors despite the weather. Through the rain, they made out two riders. Sheriff Jenkins on his aging bay gelding, accompanied by Frank Whitaker's stocky figure on a sturdy paint horse. Both men wore rain slickers that had done little to keep them dry in the deluge. "Tom, Mrs. Thornton," Jenkins called as they approached. "You seeing this miracle?" "Hard to miss, Sheriff," Tom replied, unable to suppress a smile at the older man's boyish excitement. Jenkins dismounted with a wince. His wounded arm had healed, but still troubled him in damp weather, and bounded up the porch steps with more energy than Tom had seen from him in years. "Been praying for this since '82, the sheriff declared, removing his hat to shake water from it. "Frank here says his creek's already running bankful." Whitaker nodded confirmation as he joined them, his weathered face split by a grin beneath his sodden beard. "Rushing like spring runoff. Haven't seen water flow like that since I settled here after the war." "What about the well?" Victoria asked. "Has it started flowing again?" The question sobered both men. Jenkins shook his head. "Not yet. Checked mine this morning before the rain started. Still dry as a sermon." "Same with mine," Whitaker confirmed. "Whatever that old Apache did to the underground waterways, this rain hasn't undone it yet." Tom wasn't surprised. Cheyenne had been clear that the spirit water would sleep until the natural balance was restored, a process that might take seasons, not hours. Rain's a start, he said. Land needs to heal before the deeper waters return. Jenkins studied Tom with knowing eyes that missed little. Speaking of healing, he remarked, glancing between Tom and Victoria with barely disguised interest. Heard from Hardin that Sterling's been sentenced. Must be some relief, Mrs. Thornton. It is, Victoria acknowledged, though true justice would have required a higher court than man's. Ain't that the truth? Whitaker agreed solemnly. Still 20 years in Huntsville State Penitentiary ain't exactly a church social. Man like Sterling used to find living, he'll find it a special kind of hell. The conversation turned to practicalities, how the sudden rain might affect the drought-stricken landscape, which creeks were flowing, what this might mean for fall grazing. Tom participated, but his awareness remained centered on Victoria beside him, the subtle shift that had occurred between them as palpable as the rain-washed air. After some time, Jenkins glanced at the sky where the downpour showed no signs of abating. Should head back before the roads wash out completely, he observed. Just wanted to share the good news and invite you both to the harvest dance next month, assuming we have anything to harvest now. Dance? Victoria asked, interest brightening her features. In Gentry. Town Hall, Whitaker confirmed. Nothing fancy like you'd see in Boston, ma'am, but we managed to have a good time. Jenkins here even shaves for the occasion. The sheriff ran a self-conscious hand over his stubbled jaw. Speaking of which, I'd best start growing out my mustache again. Sarah Miller says it makes me look distinguished. That what she calls it? Whitaker teased. Thought she said extinguished last time. The easy banter continued as the men prepared to depart, mounting up with promises to check on Tom's herd in the south pasture on their way back to town. As they rode away into the rain, Victoria leaned against the porch rail, a contemplative expression on her face. A dance, she mused. It's been quite some time since I attended such a gathering. We don't have to go, Tom offered, sensing some reservation in her tone. Victoria turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. But I'd like to, very much. Then we'll go, he said simply. She studied him, head tilted slightly. You don't care for dancing. Tom considered his answer. Haven't had much occasion for it, but I'm willing to learn if it would please you. The smile that bloomed across Victoria's face was worth any amount of social discomfort he might endure. It would please me very much, Mr. McGrady. She moved closer, taking his hand in hers again. Though I should warn you, I'm quite particular about my dance partners. Is that so? Tom found himself smiling in return, the expression coming more naturally than it had in years. I only dance with men who ask me to stay. She teased, her eyes bright with happiness. Tom pulled her gently closer still, marveling at the ease with which they had crossed the careful distance maintained these many months. Then I believe I'm qualified. The rain continued to fall as they stood together on the porch of the half-built cabin, hands intertwined, watching the transformation of the land they both now called home. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mesas, not a threat, but a promise that change, while sometimes violent, brought new life in its wake. Later that evening, as they sat beside the fireplace in comfortable silence, a scratching at the door announced an unexpected visitor. Tom opened it to find Cheyenne standing on the porch, seemingly untouched by the rain, despite the deluge that continued unabated. The waters have returned to the sky, the old Apache observed, entering at Tom's gesture. Now they cleanse the earth. Will the underground rivers flow again? Victoria asked, offering Cheyenne the chair nearest the fire. The medicine man settled into it with the fluid grace that belied his years. When the time is right, when the balance returns. His dark eyes studied them both, a knowing glint in their depths. I see other waters have begun flowing already. Tom felt heat rise in his face at the perceptiveness of the observation. Victoria, less constrained by frontier reticence, simply smiled and moved to stand beside Tom's chair, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. I've decided to stay, she said simply, to make Broken Creek my home. Cheyenne nodded as if he had expected nothing less. The land has chosen well. He reached into the pouch at his waist, withdrawing a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. I bring a gift for this new beginning. He extended the package to Victoria, who accepted it with a curious expression. Unwrapping the deerskin revealed a pendant of polished turquoise veined with copper and suspended on a leather cord. The stone had been worked into an unusual shape, something like a raindrop, but with angular edges that caught the firelight. It is very old, Cheyenne explained, worn by women of my people who guarded the water spirits. Now it belongs to you, Boston widow, who found her true home in the dry lands. Victoria's fingers traced the contours of the pendant with reverent appreciation. It's beautiful, Cheyenne, but surely this should remain with your people. The old Apache shook his head. You are its rightful guardian now. When children come, you will teach them the value of water and earth. They will grow knowing both worlds, yours and mine, and perhaps find wisdom in the space between. Tom felt a jolt at the casual mention of children, a possibility he had scarcely allowed himself to consider. He glanced at Victoria, expecting similar surprise, but found her smiling softly as she slipped the pendant over her head. Thank you, she said, the simple words carrying deeper meaning. I will honor its history and purpose. Cheyenne turned to Tom, extracting a second item from his pouch. A small clay vessel similar to the one he had used at the false shaft, but smaller size to fit in a man's palm. For you, Thomas McGrady, son of Ellen, who respected the old ways. He placed the vessel in Tom's hands. Water sleeps within the clay, waiting to awaken, like the spirit of a warrior dormant until needed. Tom accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity, recognizing it as both gesture of respect and implicit responsibility. I'll keep it safe. See that you do. Cheyenne Rose's visit, as brief as it was significant. The rain will continue for 7 days. When it ends, the rebuilding can truly begin. With that pronouncement, he departed as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving Tom and Victoria alone with their gifts and the implications of his words. 7 days of rain. Victoria mused, her fingers absently touching the turquoise pendant at her throat. Biblical. Cheyenne would say the stories share the same truth told in different words. Tom replied, setting the small vessel carefully on the mantel. Victoria moved to the window, watching the rain pattern against the glass. Do you think it's true about the underground rivers flowing again someday? Tom joined her, drawn as much to her presence as to the view. I believe Cheyenne understands things about this land that go beyond what can be seen or measured. If he says the water will return when balance is restored, I'm inclined to trust him. She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the lamplight. And us, this beginning we've embarked upon. What do you believe about that? Tom considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. 3 months ago, he would have been incapable of articulating such feelings. Now the words came more easily than he expected. I believe, he said slowly, that some things can't be explained, only experienced, like rain after drought. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the simple intimacy of the gesture still new enough to quicken his pulse. I never expected you, Victoria Thornton. Never looked for companionship or whatever this is becoming between us. And yet here we are, she said softly. Here we are, he agreed. I can't promise it will be easy. Can't even promise I'll be good at it, sharing my life, building something together. But I want to try. Victoria smiled, leaning into his touch. That's all anyone can ask. The trying. Outside, the rain continued to fall, cleansing the parched earth and filling dry creek beds with rushing water. Inside, a different kind of drought ended as Tom McGrady learned what it meant to let another person into the carefully guarded sanctuary of his heart. Life would never be the same at Broken Creek Ranch, and for the first time in 40 years, Thomas McGrady was grateful for change.